There we
Okay.
go.
And we'll have you just step away. Cool. So, hey, everybody. Look, I see Alex in the chat there says hello. We see you and we're live right now. All right. So what we've got here is 3 days of 1 hour a day where we're going to learn some C sharp. We're going to do this at a pretty basic level. This is a beginner class. So if you have advanced questions, if you have 300 level questions, this is probably not the place to do it because we want folks to learn C sharp. And maybe we'll do an advanced class another day. So my name is Scott Hanselman, and I work at Microsoft here on .NET. And Shrita, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Sharita Owsley, and I work in the M365 Admin Center group.
Okay. And you work in TypeScript, actually, don't you?
Yes. With a little bit of the C sharp on the back end. So. Yeah.
So I thought it would be cool because we're learning C sharp together if we bring Sharita in, because TypeScript is a language that has some C sharpiness in it. But Sharita, I think, is a really typical engineer because she's learning C sharp and getting deeper in C sharp, but has experience in another language. And a lot of the folks that are listening probably have some experience in maybe a little Python or a little TypeScript or whatever, and they want to get deeper into C sharp. So I thought that would be cool. So you'll have the TypeScript perspective, and I don't know TypeScript. So here we have two people who know two different languages. So that'll be cool.
Yes.
All right. Definitely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to show you all how to follow along, and we're going to install this this education pack. This is called the .NET Education Pack. So let's go ahead and have Rebecca put our screen big here. Now, on my machine here, I've got Visual Studio Code and a program. We're going to get deeper into this a little later, but this is some code. What I'm going to do to show you what we're going to do here is I'm going to go and run the Windows Sandbox. The Windows Sandbox is something that's nice for testing things. So this is going to allow me to have a brand new free computer here. So I'm just going to open it up. It's kind of like a virtual machine. Sandbox is great for testing. You don't have to do this, but I wanted to show you how to set up a free, like a total machine from scratch. So let's say here's a computer from scratch. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to say .net or .dot.net. Now, if you want, you can go and Google with Bing for Learn C Sharp, or Google with Google. And if you find the .net website, it'll look kind of like this: dot.net.microsoft.com. This page here, .net. I'll go ahead and make this really large to make sure that that's clear. This is where we're going to go right here. And specifically, we're going to go to Learn to Code. So .net.microsoft.com/learn to code. And it's that learn to code part. And this is something that no one has seen before. We're actually kind of launching this right here. I think only Shrita saw this a couple of days ago, because this is a thing called the .NET Education Pack. And if you know you're at the right place, if it says Hi Friends. Now, when you installed your TypeScript, Shrita, you probably installed the TypeScript SDK, and you had to download 3 or 4 things to make that happen.
Yes. So long ago, too.
Yeah, it's probably a long time ago. We tend to install stuff, and then we just kind of leave it there, and it does its thing. So with .NET and C Sharp, you usually install an SDK, a software development kit. So when people say SDK, that's what that means. So again, if I have a tendency to say a 3-letter acronym, you can keep me honest, Sharita, or folks in the chat can say, hey, what's that acronym mean? Software Development Kit. And C Sharp is a language. And then you'll hear me say .NET a lot. And I know that when you were starting .NET, Sharita, you found that confusing because people seem to interchange the two titles.
Yes, for sure.
So do you know the difference between .NET and C Sharp? Because I find a lot of people get really confused about that and don't know the difference.
My understanding is .NET is the framework that we write the C Sharp code.
So the C Sharp language is your code that you're going to have sitting on top of the .NET framework. And there's different .NETs. So .NET can also be kind of considered an ecosystem or a community. And that can be a little bit confusing because it turns out there's actually more than one language that you can use. You can use F# and Visual Basic, but we're going to talk about C#. So .NET is the libraries and all that kind of stuff. So I guess you use TypeScript TypeScript turns into JavaScript, and then there's a JavaScript community, and you can use their libraries too?
Yes, and we're building it on top of React. So
that's a good point.
Yeah, so it's a little bit different still because.
Yeah. So you're using React, and with React, that's a programming style and also a UI. You have components and things like that. So
Correct.
Within .NET, we also have UI components and things like that as well. So that's a great point. So the C# language is part of the .NET ecosystem. So when I came here to the home page here with .NET, it says free, cross-platform, open source. Cross-platform means it runs anywhere. And you can build all kinds of apps. So this is a thing that I think C# is really cool at that maybe other languages aren't as cool about, is that you can make web apps. You can even work on React. You can do desktop apps. You can make games. A lot of games are written in C#. You can do cloud stuff. And you can scroll down here, and if you want later on, you can maybe watch our video series where we teach different ways of doing .NET and C#. We talk about, on the Mac, we talk about doing game development. So there's lots and lots of videos and a great community to answer your questions. But what we did for you all today is we made this Learn to Code pack. So again, that is at .net.microsoft.com/learn-to-code. dotnet.microsoft.com/learn-to-code. I'm going to hit download for Windows. There's also a Mac one. So I'll hit download for Windows. And it's going to start downloading this thing here that says .NET Coding Pack. And when I open that, it's going to bring up a little installer. And you'll know it's the right installer if you see the little .NET bot. That's our buddy. You know how there's like the Python elephant and there's the Node turtle with a rocket ship on his back. Everybody's got their little mascot. That's our mascot. So I'll hit next, and then he's going to get to work. Now what he's doing is he's installing Visual Studio Code. And Trita, you've already installed it. I've got it installed on my machine as well. But it's going to install the C# compiler, the .NET libraries, and all the things that we need, as well as a new thing that no one's ever seen before. That is called .NET Notebooks. And if you've ever heard of Jupyter Notebooks, it's kind of like Microsoft Word, where you have like prose, like actual text in English with code. So it's like some paragraphs and some code, some paragraphs and some code. And it's kind of a cool way to learn that. Question in the chat here from Abhishek, who is using Linux or Ubuntu. Yeah, you can go ahead and install .NET on Ubuntu if you want to. You can follow the instructions. We don't have an installer for the pack that we're showing, but you can definitely go to the .NET website. We'll go up here. You can click downloads. You can go and say all downloads. And we actually have a section where we talk about getting Linux. So if you go and say Linux, here's your how to install .NET on Linux. And you can also install Visual Studio Code on Linux. And Ubuntu, I believe, includes Visual Studio Code. So that should be easier for you. All right, so our little guy has said cool, and it's working out great. So I hit finish, and he's going to launch Visual Studio Code. And again, this is a fresh computer, so this will be the same thing that you'll see. And it'll start kind of, look at this little, what is this, a progress bar here, and it's going to say installing .NET Interactive. This interactive notebook is going to pop up, and it's going to say getting started with C# for beginners. I'm going to make that screen really big. And these are little notifications that I'll go ahead and close these notifications. Now this is where things get a little interesting. This is not like how you write a C# program, right? Usually you open like a project file and things like that. You've done that in Visual Studio 2019, the bigger Visual Studio, right, Sharita?
Yes.
And that has a project file, and it's like a whole thing. This is kind of cool where you've got some text, like Markdown, from like Markdown in GitHub, and then some Markdown. And then I got some code right here just sitting in a cell. This is called a cell. And it's got a little play button by it. So if I hit play on that, it's going to start and say hello world, which is kind of cool. And I can, change this code. I can change this Markdown. I can even add my own. If I wanted to like start typing, here is some text I wrote. I think I can go hello. Yeah, see, like it's Markdown, right? And then close it up. So this is kind of a cool way that teachers and students can share these notebooks. This file right now is called a DIB. A DIB is a .NET Interactive book. And this book here is what we're going to kind of go through, and this is going to help us learn C#. But it's worth pointing out that a little later, probably either later today or tomorrow, we'll get into here. And this is really interesting, isn't it? Because here we see console.writeline, hello world, which you see in a lot of apps. And then there's like all this other stuff. You know how, like when you started, Sharita, you probably, when you learned to code, they told you to ignore all of this, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And how do you think about that? Like when you do TypeScript, you're learning the language, but then you got to learn all the other crap around it. How do you know what to ignore and what not to ignore?
It's really hard when you have all of these new things thrown at you and you want things to work. And so what I've learned is if you're practicing or you're trying to get something to work, you have to then go back and figure out, okay, what's important here and what these things actually mean. So for instance, here, you can't even start this. You can't code this without having the using statement or having the namespace because it won't draw from the right project. So you kind of go back and you figure out step by step, okay, what does this mean? How is this useful? So
that's a great point. So what you're going to have to do with some of the things that we're going to show you, like Sharita says, is you're going to ignore stuff. And then later you're going to go back and you're going to say, oh yeah, now I get what that is. They told me to ignore it, but now I know what that is. So for now, we're going to ignore some of these things. And that's what's cool about these notebooks is that the using, like you pointed out, the other stuff, it's in there. You just can't see it. We're telling people to ignore it. And this is a cool way for us to learn about the syntax rather than getting into the weeds about usings and namespaces and all that kind of stuff like this. And to the folks that are on the chat here, we're going to be doing 3 classes. They're just an hour long, and they're going to be 1, 2, 3. This is number 1. We'll do the same one. We'll do another one tomorrow. That'll be a little bit more advanced, and maybe we'll make a web page in 2 days, which will be kind of cool. So when I said hello world and I hit play, here in the .NET Interactive Notebook, it is going to compile that code and turn it into something and then output it right here. So let's see if that's real. We'll say hi, Sharita, and then we'll hit play. And you see, look, it took like no time at all, and it said hello, and it put that output right in here. So this is really actual code, and we're editing it within the larger Visual Studio Code, but it's not a project. We can't take this notebook and like put it on an iPhone or make an app yet. We're just learning about the language syntax. Okay, cool. Now, console is a thing that's built in. I know that in TypeScript, what do you say? Console.log? Console.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
.log.
Yeah, .log. So in TypeScript, where does that go? It goes into the F12 browser tools, or does it? It doesn't output on the web page, right?
Yes, the development tools in the
right,
console.
exactly.
Yeah.
So in this context, the console is our development tools, right? We're not really outputting anywhere. If we wrote this as an app, if we made like a little console app, and a console app would be like if you came down here and you ran the command prompt, it would output to this console. So console is kind of a abstract concept in this way. So when you say console.writeline, console is in this context right here. And then when I type console below it, you can do this too. You can take console and hit the dot. And you see how it looks. These are all the things consoles can do. This is really common in every language, isn't it? I mean, yes. TypeScript does this, Python does this. You have a thing, you have an object, and then you have the stuff that it can do. Terry, if you're having an echo, it might be that you're on YouTube. You have 2 tabs open. You might have 2 different things open, but we definitely don't have an echo over here. Okay, so I can say console.write line again, and I can say here is another line. Okay, and you even get a help that pops up. You see here when I typed in console.write line, it says it writes the specified string with the line terminator, and I'm going to hit play. Now notice here I don't have a semicolon at the end. Let's remove this semicolon here, and do you think this is going to work? Any take a bet? Let's find out.
No.
Nope, exactly. We did not work. It says colon expected. Now, I don't know about you, but when I started programming and I started getting errors, they were really threatening. Like I felt stressed about these errors, and I don't know why.
I still do.
Yeah.
Not these small ones, like,
Yeah.
if you see the red squiggle there, you already know that an error is expected. But
That's a great point. There is a red squiggle there, and those squiggles make a big difference. So I'm going to hover over that red squiggle. It's kind of like a spelling error in Word, right? So
yes,
that's trying to tell me it's going to be okay. And look, that's not very threatening. Okay.
no,
Yeah.
no.
Expected a semicolon. I think it's when you start seeing these where it's like, am I supposed to know that number? And like, what are these? Well, that's line one, and then you have to go 37,
Mm-hmm.
characters in, and then that's the code. And apparently that's like C# error number 1000 and whatever. Okay.
Well, we seem to have a big error here in the comments now.
Okay, that's a great point. So some of the folks in the comments may be having an error. If you install the coding pack, again, that would be at .NET.Microsoft.com/learn-to-code. That will install the interactive notebooks. So if you're just doing this in Visual Studio Code, you might have some challenges. You want to get this coding pack, but if you're getting that error, you can notice down here we have a section that says already have .NET, go and install the interactive notebook. So that link is below the download here. So for the couple of people in the chat who are having trouble, take a look at that. Okay, so let's go back to this error here. We can kind of ignore this. There's good detail that this is just a unique thing that you can go and see. And then I'll go ahead and add my semicolons and we'll hit play.
Nice.
And it works. So that's not too bad. That's cool. Now, this is the object console, and the console can do all kinds of stuff. So again, we can say console dot, and I can say console dot write line, and in the future, you can even read keys and make games or stuff. It all starts here. But when I said write line, and I open this parentheses up, this can be a little confusing. You see this 1 of 18? There's lots of different things I can give to a console. Yeah, this introduces the concept of variables. Like, look, there's an int. It can take an integer and a double. And I found this a little stressful as well because it's like, wow, there's like 18 different versions.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is cool. It shows that there's a lot underneath this.
Yeah.
It's a lot more than just like strings, right? So let's scroll down a little bit and let's talk about variables. Okay. Now, variables in C# are, I'll be interested in how they're different or the same from JavaScript or TypeScript. C# is what's called strongly typed, right? So strongly typed means you got to tell me the type, and once you tell me, you can't really change it. And JavaScript's kind of like loosey-goosey, right?
Yeah, it is. It'll figure it out.
That's a great point. It'll figure it out. So that's a thing that sometimes when you're coming from JavaScript or from a new language, that people find C# a little bit like why are you kind of being so strict?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But then TypeScript makes that strictness and adds it on top of JavaScript and says you're going to be strict and you're going to do things the way I want it to be done.
It does. Yep. And it won't compile unless it's fixed. So that is a good point.
That is a good point. So here I'm saying string a friend equals Bill. We'll change that. And I'm saying, hey, there's a string. And then the name is another thing people stress out about. The name can be anything. Like that variable there, we can make that anything we want. But people sometimes think it needs to be specific. It's really like it's up to you. It can be whatever you want. But then what happened here? Squiggly time. Right? A friend is not a thing, right? So if I say string and I give it a silly name, let's go back and we'll call it friend. Let's do this. We'll make it close, but not exact. So we said string friend, and then we have console.write line a friend. It's like the name a friend doesn't exist. I don't know what a friend is. These need to line up. All right, so let's make them line up. And then you wait a moment, and then that squiggly will go away. And that squiggly, it's compiling in the background. It's like it's thinking. It's like looking at the code in the background. You were going to say something?
Cool. Yeah. Could we talk about the people may be wondering about the camel case, Pascal case? What kind of case do we need to worry about that here?
Yeah, that's a great point. So Sarita used that term camel case. Let's go ahead and make a little space here. And camel, like it's like a hump, like a camel's hump. Camel case would be like having a hump like this. So the first letter is lowercase, and in the middle you have the hump of the camel. And then there's what's called kebab case, where people go like that.
Oh yeah,
and
Python.
you know, and then there's lowercase, there's uppercase. Sometimes people make their constants uppercase. And then there's a thing that's called Pascal casing. I don't know why it's called it. I guess Pascal did it first. It was a language like this. That's really style. Like, you know how in English it's like names are capitalized.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people that will argue you all the way to the ends of the earth because they're like, no, this should have said, they'll like do this. They'll put the type at the beginning of the name. That's called Hungarian naming. And then, like, if I had an int, I would say like this.
Oh.
And they'll say that's the way to do it, right? That's really up to you. You get to decide your style. So when you joined a team, when you joined Office 365, my guess is that you probably inherited some code.
Yes.
And they had a style?
Correct. Yep. And for JavaScript, React, we primarily use camel case. But I noticed in the C# code, it's Pascal.
Yeah, and that means that the people who started yours probably decided to have that be a certain way. I think when folks are starting, that matters less. But when you get a lot of code, like you work on, Office 365 and Microsoft 365, and you got thousands of files, you kind of want a style.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think you just need to pick a style that works for you more than to start. I wouldn't sweat it when you're getting started. Right? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and play that. There you go. And that worked right there. So this string, a friend, we've declared that string exists right here. Okay. We've declared that string exists. And now from this point down, it's going to keep existing. So here we said there's a string called a friend. Now down here, we can add another friend, and we're going to reassign the variable's value. So it is Sharita here. It's going to be Scott here. I hit play, and now it's Scott. Okay, so we can change the value of these variables. But what if I said Scott equals 99? All right.
The type.
Yeah, and there we go, just like we were talking about before. And then the type, now the type is a thing, right? Well, you decided like 5 minutes ago, we were talking about strings, and now you're changing it up and you're stressing me out. And this is, again, where we start getting into messages that can be a little threatening. They're really like correct, like they're well phrased, but they start using words like implicitly convert, and it can be a little bit confusing. And you see that the error number is different. But it's like you're asking me to change this type without any hints, no advice. You're just saying do it. And you can't do that in C#, and that's strong typing. Now in JavaScript, you can just change it and the world continues, I guess.
Well, since we're using TypeScript, no, that's not allowed.
Yeah. So in TypeScript, you can't do that, and in JavaScript, you can. And that's why people like TypeScript, right? It's strict.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the data type that we're using here is called a string. And this is, I think, pretty interesting because there's lots of different ways to take two strings and put them together. And this here in our plus sign is called an operator. And this is a little bit of an abstract concept, but it's worth pointing out. When you say 2 + 2, you get that the plus is going to do a thing to the two twos. But what does it mean to like plus some strings? Somebody had to decide what that meant. What does it mean to like add two strings together? So someone said, all right, well, if you have two strings, you can add them together and it will concatenate them. And that it works. It's kind of intuitive. This feels like it should work. Every language is different though. This is newish, called string interpolation. And again, I don't know why they make the names so like complicated. Like interpolation is kind of weird. And I'm actually going to just take a second and I'm going to switch back over to my own machine, because remember that I was over there in I was over there in the sandbox. And
Yes.
if you get lost, you can hit Control-Shift-P and you can click .NET Getting Started if you're looking for that dib file and you need to get it back. And again, this was all installed from the coding pack. So I'm back over in my own personal Visual Studio Code, and that's going to allow me to do some zooming in. So I'm going to go and run each of these cells one at a time. Actually, I'll change our friend names because they're wrong over here. And then we'll go and we'll run it, and then run it. I'm running them in order. And then we go here. Okay, and this is going to allow me now to zoom in and point at stuff, which I think is going to make things a little easier. Cool.
Yeah.
So string interpolation is a new feature in C#. And if I click on that, I can go into the docs. And this is kind of interesting. Let's look at this string here. This is pretty complicated. Hello, name, today is day of the week. And then something crazy going on here. And then now. So you could imagine if you were doing that with pluses, it would get a little out of control.
Oh my goodness.
You probably found code like this that someone else wrote back in the day, and it ends up on multiple lines, and you're thinking a lot.
Yeah.
It's no fun. And when it gets long like this, wouldn't it be easier to put the variable name in the string? You see how it changes color? This is enabled by adding that $sign. So once you add that $sign, it turns that string into like a more interesting string that can be used like this. So that doesn't work. See how a friend is yellow? And as soon as I put the $sign there, it turns white.
Variable.
Yeah, it knows about the variable. Right, exactly. This is just a string. I mean, let's try this actually. Yeah, see? It's like it's just outputting the string because just because you use these curly braces, nobody cares. But as soon as you put it into interpolation mode, again, another example where they give a complicated name to a thing, then I can start using the names of things. So like we've got what? We've got a friend. We had two friends. So let's go down and let's actually have two variables. We'll have first friend and we'll have second friend. And we'll go and run that. Okay, there you go. Now let's try it without the $sign.
Ooh.
So why do you think, this is a trick question on it, not a trick question, but a little bit of like context, because languages grow, like we add words, right? We're adding words all the time. Why do you think you need this here? Like, why didn't they just make it automatic so that when you use these curly braces that it would automatically, output the values of first friend? Want to guess on that?
Why there?
Yeah, why? Well, not why there. More, it's like, why do they need a marker? Why do they need a thing here to do that? Like, they could have put anything, but they needed to basically make the string different. They could have just basically lit it up, right? They could have just made all strings smart one day. C# new version came out, right? But remember, you said you came to a code base that was full of existing code, right? Well, what if we decided to start changing the behavior of your code and we didn't tell you? So they needed a thing, a marker, so that they could maintain compatibility. They didn't want to break all your existing code because you might have existing strings that use these little curlies. The little curlies are the thing that tells you that it's a variable name. You see?
Yeah.
Right. But, you might have strings lying around. I can't do brackets. You see? Everything's different. It's this here that gave them a way to say, like, well, that's an old style string and that's a new style string. So they needed to give a marker. Nope, now I've got myself all confused. And look, I typed a bunch of stuff accidentally and it's doing its best to tell me what's going on. And it's putting the squiggly where it thinks it is. And then once you get no squigglies, you can run it again and then it'll work. Okay. Now remember that console had a bunch of stuff. There's our stuff, right? And we have these variables like friend that are strings. What do you think is going to happen if I hit first friend dot? Is it going to have stuff?
It's not going to have anything.
Well, it's a string though. Our strings are objects. So
well, you can too. Yeah.
Right. So it's got string stuff. So
there we go. To list. Yes, to upper.
Yeah, to list, to upper.
Mhm.
These are stringy things. Yeah, that's a good question. Let's do this. To upper. Try that. Let's say first friend equals first friend dot to upper. I don't even know. What will this do? Yep, say look. So that's cool. So this object has a bunch of string stuff. So those are hanging off of. I like to think of them as hanging off of. It is a lot of stringy stuff. Thank you, Abhishek. Exactly. Terry Andre is pointing out, yes, it will have a method. It'll have a method. And this is this symbol here, this symbol in this little box, I guess, means method. I don't really know what these little boxes mean, right? I see a key here.
Yes.
Or a wrench, rather, pardon me. That's a property. So a property is like a characteristic of something like Sharita.height, right? As opposed to Sharita.sit down or Sharita.stand up.
Mm-hmm.
Methods are verbs, right?
Yes.
And properties are like characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
Scott.age, things like that. So here we said,
a really great way to think of it.
Isn't that nice? You like that?
Mm-hmm. I like that.
I appreciate that. All right. So let's try this. What if we took this method to upper? I'm going to delete this. And what if we said this? Let's say second friend dot, and we'll put to upper in here. Now I'm going to do this wrong first, and then I'll do it right. This is a bad error message, and you're going to bump into bad error messages sometimes. And by a bad error message, I mean it doesn't tell you what you need to know. And you probably bump into these twice a day, right?
I do.
Yeah. Super annoying. Abhishek is asking, why are the properties or methods capitalized? This is a great question here, because we were talking about when you inherit a code base, someone who, made that code base had to decide what they were going to do things with. Are they going to name them? These people decided to do their casing like this, where each word is uppercase. Mm-hmm. So some worlds do it like this. Like, I think, do you all do this like this in TypeScript?
JavaScript, yes, is lower. It's actually like the U would be.
The U would be like this. Yeah. So every language got a style. So the reason that the properties and methods are capitalized is because somebody decided to back in the day. That's the answer. And that's a .NET style. You can see that like console.writeLine has a capital C and then uppercases here. Now, this error message really kind of sucks. I think this part here is useless. Like I would honestly have to go and search for that. I don't even know what that means. It's true though, right? I mean, you got to be real.
Yeah.
But this, I think, possibly does tell us what. And a lot of people don't even read the error messages, right? You just like see the error and you go, ugh, and then you freeze. Got to read the error. Got to read the error. So what's it trying to tell us here? We're saying second friend dot to upper. That's a method. We didn't mean to go and get like dot length or a property. This might work actually. My friends are Scott and 7. That's how many characters are in Sharita. But I said to upper, but I did not put the
invoke. Yep.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. I did not invoke it. So it's these parentheses here that invoke the thing. And we didn't pass anything into to upper. We didn't give it an argument, so it didn't matter. And let me actually go here and we'll go to lower. Oops. We'll run that. Now this is interesting. I just realized that look how I'm actually using the Beyonce theme. That's why my colors are pink. This is a cool theme you can install.
It's one of my favorites.
You like this one? It's really fun. Yeah, it's actually called Beyonce. So if you go to BeyonceTheme.com, they've got it for Bash. This is done by Mina Markham, and it's a really like super loud, awesome Visual Studio Code theme. It's super fun, so you can check that out. Okay, I noticed that. Look, it's italics, and it's white and like turned, right? But when I went like this, Visual Studio Code is trying to help me out, right? They're doing that work to make things easier for you, because if I took all this code and I just put this in a notepad, I mean, can you imagine writing code like this all day? It just blurs your eyes, and
yes,
that's how we did it back in the day.
Oh no.
Yes. Even worse, it was like black screen and it was green screen, like warped, and you just looking at it and you're like, I remember once that I think I probably spent 3 hours looking for a semicolon, and there's no squigglies, there's nothing, and you just have to go click. But
Wow.
look right there. If I remove that semicolon, what happens on the second line? It doesn't tell me it's missing a semicolon, but it does say something's not right. TypeScript do that too?
Yep.
That kind of stuff is like, let the computer do some work. Let the computer do some work. So Terry's asking what the name for the parentheses is. I think this is technically called a method invocation, these two parentheses. Yeah?
Yeah.
So we're invoking that method. And then sometimes those methods take parameters. For example, this is actually a little bit of trivia here for you. I don't know if you've done anything in multiple languages, like have you ever written code that output French or Spanish or something else, or the site you work on might handle that for you.
Yes.
So when you say
like
to
a
upper,
link.
Yeah. So if I say to upper, there's two choices. One of them takes a culture. Here's a little trivia. If you take the letter I, this is random, but it's fun to have random trivia sometimes in the middle of a thing. Did you know that there's lowercase I and capital I, right? You've probably done that before. Well, in Turkey, their lowercase I is different. They have, that's their lowercase I. It doesn't have a dot. So when you take a lowercase I and you make it an uppercase I, it looks like this. Okay, that makes sense. But then in Turkey, if you take a I with a dot and you make an uppercase I in the Turkish language, you would get an uppercase I with a dot.
Oh.
Which makes sense. Like, we should have done that. Like, that would have been cool. But then we'd have 4 I's, right? So this means something really interesting. And this is kind of a little bit of an obscure thing, but something to think about. If you say friend.toUpper and Sharita has an I in your name, it went from a lowercase with a dot to an uppercase because we have a culture that we're using right here, which is English in the United States. But if we were in Turkey, maybe we would pass that culture in to toUpper, and then it would change how your name was capitalized.
So what would that look like? Could we?
Yeah. Well, so let's go and see. So we would go down here and let's say your name would end up looking like this, right? And then the culture, you'd have to get that culture from somewhere, right?
Okay, gotcha.
You got it? And then so you might think, okay, that's kind of cool or whatever, but what would happen then if in the database it was stored like this? And then later on, you're like, I'm going to compare these two strings. Like maybe I'm typing in my password or whatever. Someone from the US saved the password, or not a password, maybe that password's not a good example. First name, last name, whatever.
Yes.
And then you end up doing a toUpper with a different culture, and these two are not going to match, and you're going to be like, what happened? Yeah. And here's the part that's hard, and this is part of the things about computers that's kind of difficult. There's nothing here to hint you to that. You're just getting that culture from elsewhere. So there's explicit or specific variables, and then there's like hidden ones. Like culture comes from your computer. So if we have a friend on the live stream right now in Turkey, they're going to have a different experience than you and I will when they're playing with our notebook. Isn't that interesting?
Yes, very.
Yeah. So they're going to have to either set it explicitly. They're going to say, we're going to do it like this, or they're going to have to at least be aware, right? So that's interesting stuff.
Yeah, very cool to know.
Yeah. So here inside of our string, we're calling a method. We can scroll down a little bit and we can see that we're using like length. So you can say Scott has X letters, Shrita has 7 letters. We can pull out that property, and that works just great. And then all those different things that strings have, they have methods like trimming. So here's a string with a whole bunch of extra text, bunch of spaces. Right, so it's like space, 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 hello world, space, space, space. We can trim it. They just put brackets here to show. The brackets don't matter. The brackets are like, I could go like that if I wanted to, right? And then we hit star. See how hello world has the stars
Yes.
around it? Right.
Mm-hmm.
But then if we go down here, let's change that and make it stars. Trim just the start. So it's trimming off the space. Because you probably, like, you know, you pass in a last name and you forget to trim off a space, and then your last name has a space forever. Okay. Then you can do things like replaces, search and replace. So here I'm going to replace the word hello with the word greetings. So we pass in hello world, we print it out, then we replace every instance of hello. Let's say if we have hello world, hello, hello world, hello. We have hello in there 3 times. It's going to replace them all. All right. And we saw, yeah, go ahead.
Is it good practice to remember all of these methods, or should we just know how to use them or use the intelligence to help?
That's a great question. So let's think about it in the context of learning another language that's not English, for example. We're speaking in English because we're in the US right now. But if we were speaking in Spanish, yes, I should remember like the word for hunger.
Mm-hmm.
But if I can't remember it, I do know that it should exist. And there's a difference between remembering the exact word and remembering that it ought to exist.
Okay.
So I don't know TypeScript, but I'm pretty sure there's got to be a way to replace stuff. I don't know if it's called replace, or if I don't know if you have a thing called toUpper, but you should, right? Like it's a thing. So I don't remember the word, and I don't get all stressed out. Like if I started typing in Python, I would be like, how do you toUpper a string in Python? How do you say hunger in Spanish? I don't think that it's okay. I don't try to memorize this stuff. There's a lot here.
A lot.
But like, let's look at it this way. Trimming spaces is a thing. Whether it's trim end or end trim or start trim or what, it's trimming spaces. I'll go and I'll type in trim and then I'll find it. So IntelliSense is like, you know, a helper, but it's not necessarily a crutch. Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah, I don't want to remember all this stuff. Like, let the computer do its work. Let the computer do its work. All right. So then we can go and search for things. And this is interesting. So we have a contains. Now, again, every language is different. There's probably a way in TypeScript to go and search for, like, does it contain something? But now we're starting to get into types here, and this is interesting. Notice that it says true and false. It doesn't say yes or no. It didn't return the string. We asked it a question. We said console.writeLine, and then we passed, here's the opener, and here's the close, and we said song lyrics dot contains goodbye, and it said return, and we looked for greetings, and it said false. So song lyrics dot contains, if we hover over the word contains, right there. When you're reading docs, I think this is the same in every language. There's a declaration of what the method does. This method is 4 strings. Song lyrics is a string. And it takes a string. Here's a string here. There's 5 different versions, but we're going to ignore that. And it returns a Boolean. A Boolean. And that's called the method signature. There's only one contains in the universe right here. Well, there's 5, but bear with me. But that returns an integer. So it returns a Boolean, rather. So if we went like this, pull that out of there, put it here. Okay, it's mad because I don't have my semicolon. Put that there. Well, we didn't do anything because we didn't put anything in here, right? So we didn't put anything in here and we didn't save the Boolean. The Boolean just got returned and it's in the air now.
Yes.
Okay, Boolean has it. I don't know, I'm just making up variable names. Okay. Well, here we saved it, but we didn't do anything with it. There we go. Now it's back. When we take this chunk of code here and we put it inside here, the variable, the return value, the thing that came out of contains,
Yes.
it exists. It doesn't have a name anymore. So it's kind of like it's there for a second, but it just gets returned.
Is it a better practice to put it inside of a variable? It looks cleaner. It's
That's a
easier
great
to
question.
follow and read.
It's easier to debug. That's a great question, right? Because when you do this, that means I can put a breakpoint here, and we'll talk about breakpoints tomorrow or the next day. That means I can see it, right? I can like hover over it. I can use it later. I can say console.writeLine has it. So we can test it, right? We can see, and then I can even go like this. This is like in a little extra, but like the variable has the value, and then remember the curly. Go. Right? For debugging, it's great. Where I think things go bad is when people start to try to be tricky and they put everything in one line, right? And then you have this and it goes on and on and on and on and on. And it's like, okay, somewhere in there something went bad.
Yep.
And I don't know where it is. And that's where you've probably done this, where you have to start breaking the code apart. You start splitting one line into multiple lines, right?
Yes.
So the challenge is debuggability, like there's a bug and I want to look for it, versus like cleanliness or readability, you know? I look at it as like, have you ever read like a book or a poem and they say something that's just so crisp, where it's like in like 7 words, they said something amazing. And you're just like, ooh, that was good.
Yeah, yeah.
But you have to unpack it. You have to disassemble it because you're like, man, every word meant something. And I look at that and I'm like, I'm not a good writer. And I would say, that would have took me 2 paragraphs to say that.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
That happens in code, right? I'll just sit there and like look at a line like, what in the heck is going on? And I would have done it as like, if, then, else, and it would have been like this much code. I'm like, how did they do that? The challenge is learning how to think about the code that way. And then you sacrifice readability. And I think as we become more advanced, we're going to get better and better at this kind of stuff. Let's get a little bit farther along as we can get into typecasting before we count down. We've only got about 10 more minutes here. I hope folks are having fun. This, I think, is pretty interesting. Oh, Sunil is asking, they wanted to see the overloaded contains. So thank you for that question. Let's open that up. So we have 6 different versions of contains. So when you're saying, does a string contain something, you can look for a character, one character. You can pass in a comparison rule. How do you want to do the comparison? That's a little advanced. You can say, does the string contain a string? This gets a little complicated. We'll talk about enumerables probably tomorrow or the next day. So the contains here is trying to do the most common stuff. Usually it's a character or it is a string. Now moving forward just a little bit here, we've got comments. This is how you make a single line comment. You go / this is my comment, and you can type whatever you want in here. I've even seen people, have you ever seen any ASCII art, like someone like draw a box?
Yep.
Kind of cool. Like I've seen people do really complicated, silly stuff like this. Now notice how I'm like having to make a line each time. That's kind of a hassle. So then I could do a multi-line comment.
That one.
Yeah, everything from here to here is going to be a multi-line comment. Isn't that cool? Abhishek in the chat here is saying that they like the notebooks idea. Isn't this clever?
I really like it. I like it a lot.
I feel like this is a cool way to learn because, you know, we could go and write our code like this, right? We talked about going into public static
so
void
much
main.
stuff. Yeah.
A lot, right? But here we're kind of in a book. It's kind of like being in Microsoft Word. And if you go out and search for .NET Interactive notebooks, you can learn about this stuff. Maria Nagaga on the .NET team, her team made .NET Interactive notebooks, and she explains exactly how it works, how you can set it up. It's pretty cool. If you're familiar with what are called Jupyter notebooks, which uses Python, the concept of notebooks is not new. Putting C# in here is kind of new. And if I click over here, I haven't even talked about this. You see in the right-hand corner of our notebook, you can see F#, which is another language in .NET, as well as things like JavaScript. So you can use, since you're a JavaScript, TypeScript person, you could make a TypeScript or a JavaScript notebook if you wanted, and that'd be a great way to learn as well. All right, let's try to get into variable types, and we'll leave people with variable types before we leave. Okay, so here, and we've been talking about strings. Now we've got integers, like 10, doubles, which are like really big numbers. And this is kind of weird. You don't see this a lot.
Yeah.
Let's remove that. Let's remove that and see what that is. Still works, okay? I believe that's called a type specifier. Double C# type specifier. Might get the name wrong. There's all these different numbers. Once you get into numbers, things get really complicated. Strings are easy, but numbers are stressful. You want to have a number. How much number do you want? Like if you have a float or a double or a decimal, it takes up more and more size. 4 bytes, 8 bytes, 16 bytes. You probably don't want to put someone's age in a decimal because no one's age is 28 digits long, right? And we're talking about, you know, huge, huge numbers. And what you can do if you go and read about this stuff is you put a little specifier at the end of the number, and that says that's a decimal. That M means a decimal, and this D means that's a double. But it's kind of implied, and that really depends on the system. If I go and type in something else, let's go and try like 10.5 for int. Again, we see that comparison, that conversion thing. Can't implicitly convert a double to an int. So integers don't get decimal points. They don't. You're not allowed. Now you could try to force it. You can like shove it in and see if that works. But even then, what happens? Let's see what happens. Console.writeline I. Oops, forgot my semicolon. I always do that. Hang on. I might have made a mistake. Oh, I'll make a mistake at the end of our show here, which will be fun. String, this is the value of I. I need to say, I may have to say toString. Okay, there we go. Where'd that 0.5 go? It got hacked off. We just basically, we said, we cast it so much that it's like, listen, integers don't get fractions. You just don't get it. So you can cast it. You can basically say, you know, square peg into a round hole. I'm going to push this decimal in there no matter what you say. I'm making it happen. But it's like, okay, I mean, it's on you. I'm chopping that decimal part off. You just completely lost it. So if I had like 11 point, this is all important information. Well, sorry. That's why these explicit casts, a cast of like changing a type into another type, it's kind of aggressive. you're like, I mean, I'm not going to do it for you, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to implicitly convert it. So I can do it explicitly, but you need to tell me. Karen in the chat is asking about this notebook.
Yes.
I believe that this notebook is over in, if you have installed the education pack, you hit Control-Shift-P and you can type .NET Getting Started. So this, I'll just, for those of us who may have come late, you go to .NET/Learn to Code right here, put that in the chat, say, and if you've installed this here, we will have we've put that on your hard drive. So then you hit Control-Shift-P and say .NET Getting Started. I believe it's on GitHub as well. I don't know exactly where that is right now, and I've only got 2 minutes left, but we'll get a little bit into that later. But you can see that it's down here in my extensions folder, but that's why you hit Control-Shift-P, you type Getting Started, and it'll appear right there. That was installed with the education pack. We've only got about a minute and a half. Thank you, Karen. Only got a minute and a half left. So we're just kind of getting started here. We're just dipping our toes in this world. If you don't have that getting started, Abhishek, then you probably did not install from the education pack. These are the things that you'd need: the education bundle, the .NET extension pack, and .NET Interactive Notebooks. So these three things you would install yourself if you didn't go and install that. So Abhishek, the way that you would get that for Ubuntu is you have Visual Studio Code, you have .NET, go and install the education bundle, the education pack, and interactive notebooks, and you will get that. So this is day one. We're just touching the beginnings of C#, but I think that I'm learning a lot. I'm reminding myself how these things work. I hope you're having fun, Sheree.
Trouble with the URL.
Yep, I'm going to
Can you go fix that?
recopy and paste that. Yep, I'm going to fix that. Sorry, when I posted it, it merged the sentence following with the link. So I
No
will.
worries, no worries.
Technical
we'll fix
issues
that.
on a technical session. All right,
Cool.
I'm going to pop off here and let you guys get started.
Lovely. Thank you very much. All right. So it is day two, Sharita, day two. And yesterday, we encouraged folks to go to this URL. You can see my browser where I was looking at the Nintendo games that were announced yesterday. So don't judge me by my interest. But I just felt like Legend of Zelda is coming out as a new one, and then Metroid. So I was pretty stoked about that. But
I'm sure you're not the only one.
Yeah, I think pretty much everybody has all those tabs open.
Uh-huh.
So .net.microsoft.com/learn to code. The trick is if you get to the .net homepage, you might find yourself over here and you come up to the URL and you put in /learn to code. That brings you to this new page. So you know you're at the right page if it says, "Hi friends." Now we have a coding pack, and we did this yesterday, but we can run through it real fast today.
Yeah.
We have a coding pack. It works on Mac or Windows. We did have a couple of friends yesterday who were using Ubuntu. We updated the web page yesterday. So if you already have .NET and VS Code, you can just install these two things, interactive notebooks. And then we put in a link right here that says, get started with our 101 notebook. That's the one you and I did yesterday. And this link is kind of an interesting and cool link. If I click on it, it actually will pop up a warning because it's not a real HTTP link. It's a Visual Studio Code link. Yeah. It's going to try to open VS Code. So I have to say that that's okay. And I'm going to hit OK. And then VS Code will open up and you'll get into this C# for Beginners workbook, right? And this workbook here, here's our one from yesterday where you and I had changed it. That workbook will open up directly in here. And as we saw yesterday, we'll go back to the top. We've got some pros in this little box right here. Got some pros. And each box or each cell has got text, and then it's either a code box or a markdown box. So this is a markdown box, and this is a code box. And if you know it's working, if you can go and hit the play button and you get it saying hello world or whatever. Right? Yeah. Had you ever seen notebooks before?
I have not notebooks, but I use Visual Studio Code Insiders. And so,
Okay, so you're using the insider's version, and they had
mhm,
notebooks in there. Exactly. But this idea of having text and links, like it's almost like documentation and then code, is something that in the past Python people have seen. It was called Jupyter. And that's now been released inside this notebooks concept is inside of Visual Studio Code
mhm,
instead of you're in the insider's build. And this idea here is called .NET Interactive Notebooks, because if you look over here in the corner, these are called polyglot notebooks. So they can have multiple languages, which is pretty cool. We're learning C# today, but F# is another language, and
mhm.
there's other cool languages in JavaScript. I know that you're a TypeScript programmer, so for context, your primary world is what? It's TypeScript and React.
Yes, yes.
Cool. So you're
But I have
not.
not used this in Java. I haven't tried it out.
Yeah, it's
Um,
pretty cool. Yeah, you were saying yesterday that you were pretty impressed. It's a cool way to learn because at this
yes.
point we haven't made an app, right? We're living in a notebook, which is an unusual thing. Do you think that you would have learned differently if you'd done it like this? Because we think this is a great way for people to learn the language, and then you learn the ecosystem.
Yes, I agree with that because it takes away all of the fluff and the things that you kind of ignore at the beginning to just focus on the language. But when you
Hmm.
learn when you're trying to take in everything at one time, it kind of makes things a little bit complicated, and it kind of just slows down the beginning learning process.
Right.
So,
That's a great point. And yesterday you had made the point that when we learn how to say hello world, if we go back to the top, when I learned hello world, there was a bunch of crap around it. You said
mhm,
fluff, right? Using namespace, class, public static void, and people just say, don't worry about that. And I don't
mhm,
like that. I don't like people telling me not to worry about stuff because now I'm going to worry about exactly
mhm,
that, and I'm not going to focus on the code.
yep,
So this notebook isn't an app yet, right? It's just text plus code. And we got into it. I think we were down here doing variables when we ran out of time yesterday. And you had suggested that maybe we hit the gas a little bit and we kind of bang through the rest of this notebook. And then you were interested in seeing some more apps and then maybe asking some deeper questions about what's going on underneath. Because we're kind of
yes.
driving automatic shift car right now, and you were interested in driving stick shift.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great analogy.
Yeah. I think what happens when we do something like this is we're hiding a lot of stuff, aren't we? You
Yes.
know, we're compiling this code, we're turning this code into an output, but just like the way that like TypeScript and JavaScript are hidden from you, they're in the browser. There's a runtime, there's a thing that makes the code run. There's a .NET runtime, the
Mhm.
component that takes that and makes it happen. It's being hidden from you completely right now. Like we don't even know where the files on the disk are. It's like it's down in temporary file somewhere right now. Okay, so let's go a little bit through some variables and talk about casting, do some for loops, and then see how we do. Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Cool. So when last we left our heroes, we were talking about integers and doubles and different kinds of data types. And these data types here, they are turning color in our syntax highlighting editor because they're special. So if I were to go and say, person T, well, there isn't a thing called a person. So
Mhm.
person didn't turn color. That's not a thing. And if I said character T, character is not a thing, but char is a thing. If I said integer, that doesn't turn color. Int does. And stringy isn't, but string is. So you see, as soon as I hit the keyword then goes and turns purple. So these are keywords. You can't have a string, or you don't want to have a string called, you can do it, but you don't want to like string. See how it's
Mhm.
like, is it mad? Yeah, it's like you can't call a string, right? You can't call an int. So these
Yeah.
are reserved words, and every language has got, some reserved words. And then we saw yesterday, I was making a couple of mistakes where I forgot that semicolon, and you don't need to do that. TypeScript's pretty chill about their semicolons.
Yeah, we don't use them actually.
Oh, see, I heard there's a whole controversy because like old timers want the semicolons and the new school are like, no, let the compiler figure it out. But here you can see everything becomes squiggly town and nobody likes to lose their semicolon. So the semicolon in C# is like a period at the end of the sentence. So
Yes.
they'll warn you. So that's a little confusing. And then we saw this example here where I said, I want an integer and I'm going to put a big number in it and I got a squiggly. Squiggly saying, that looks like a double. That looks like a big, weird number, and you're trying to shove it into an int. You're trying to put a big thing into a small box. Are you missing a cast? And we had talked yesterday. You had said that that JavaScript is pretty chill about types. Just var everything. Would you say var or whatever? And it's like, yeah, var, whatever.
Var, constant,
yeah,
let.
And it just figures out if it's a string. It just knows, like, yeah, it's a string. It makes a guess. It's loose typing, right?
Yes.
Here, .NET doesn't like that. .NET's strongly typed. So I have to either give it an int, then the squiggly goes away, or it's like, well, you got to be explicit. Are you sure you want to shove that big number in this small number? And then you can go like this, and you can do a cast. The problem is when you do that cast, look at the value of 11 point da 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 da. That last part of the decimal, we chopped it off. It got lost. When you try to shove something big into a small space, pieces are going to get scraped off and they're going to fall off and you're going to end up with less. So we lost that number. If I tried to shove a string into a character, I'm going to get a character because a character is one character. Question here from Mary, who's asking the difference between Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio 2019. We'll get into a little bit that later, but Visual Studio 2019 is what's called an IDE, an integrated development environment. It's like everything. It's got toolbars and testing integrated, and you can deploy to Azure directly, and it's a whole universe. While Visual Studio Code is what's called a code editor. Now, it does have an extension thing where you can like add stuff to it, but out of the box, Visual Studio Code basically edits text files. It edits your code, right? But when you want to set it up for React or TypeScript like Sharita does, you got to add some stuff. You got to add a little thing. So it's a nice starter place if you like to customize things. It's kind of a sports car. But Visual Studio 2019, which is free, you can get the free community version, or Visual Studio 2022, which is coming out soon. Here's what it looks like. And if I were going to go and create a new project in Visual Studio 2019, which we'll do a little bit later, it's got all these choices. I can make Android apps and iOS apps, cloud applications, web apps. But it looks like kind of somebody actually told me once that they felt like Visual Studio Code was like the cockpit of like a Tesla. It's like very sleek. It's very simple, but complicated underneath. But then Visual Studio 2019 is like flying an airplane, and there's dashboards and buttons, and it's like a lot of cool functionality. So some people keep them both, and some people don't. So that's how I think about it. And you spend most of your time in VS Code, right?
Yes, I do. That's why I was going to bring up another question. Why do we use maybe like Visual Studio for back end, and we just use Visual Studio Code for the front end? Because I spend most of my time in Visual Studio Code.
So Visual Studio Code, came out at a different time and has a different use because Visual Studio 2019 only runs on Mac and on Windows. And here's a program. This is actually my own personal website inside of Visual Studio 2019. You can see it's got different icons. It's got a lot more going on. It's a pretty complicated application. Enterprises, big companies use it. You can see I've got profilers to check my performance. I can look at memory. I can do detailed analysis of big enterprise applications. So you made the comment about the front end and the back end. Now you mostly do front end work, but you're consuming back end
stuff. Yes.
Okay. So the front end means like your monitor. It's the browser. It's the
Yes.
front of the app, the stuff you see. So you're making buttons and stuff. Somebody on the back end in the server room is getting data out of a database and giving it to you.
Yes.
Traditionally, and this is a generalization, traditionally you see back-end people using the Visual Studio 2019, and they're interested in how much memory is the server using, and is it being responsive, and does it get Sharita her data quickly? And those diagnostic tools are inside that application. While your app on Visual Studio Code is really great for laying out your web pages, making sure
Yes.
everything looks nice, split screen, all kinds of cool stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You can have both. So great question from Mary. And then don't feel like one's better or different than the other. Like cars are cars. Sometimes you drive a motorcycle, sometimes you drive a sports car, sometimes you drive a minivan. And here's another great point, actually. Let's mention this. I'm going to right click up here in the menu. Okay, I'm right clicking on this tab. And I'm going to right click, and you see the menu pops up, like close the editor and things like that. I'm going to click Reveal in File Explorer. Okay, and what that's going to do is it's going to show me the notebook file. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'm going to go to the Start menu, and folks can follow along if they want to. And I'm just going to type Notepad. Here's Notepad. Now we know that Notepad is not Visual Studio. There's no question that Notepad has nothing to do with code. It's just Notepad. I'm going to pick up the notebook, and I'm going to drop it directly into Notepad. So see where it says built-in variable types? Let's go find that. Built-in. I'm just going to do a find. Okay, here we go. This here is this here. You see the little code there, the little markdown. Here's the links. Look, here's the C#. You can't see this part here, but this is just a little part that says, hey, some C# is coming. And then, now we're switching back to Markdown. I could, if I wanted to, write my code in Notepad. I don't need Visual Studio. And this is like a really important thing to think about. Like, you don't need Microsoft Word. You can just do it all in text, right? You don't need Excel. Well, maybe you do. Kind of Excel is a bad idea, but you know what I mean? Like the tools make things better and better and better.
Yeah.
But that's like beyond drive and stick shift. This is like pushing the car. This would not be fun to write your code in Notepad. But people like do that sometimes. There's lots of different editors, and Notepad or Notepad++ is one. Lewis Hogan in the chat is asking, what point do you switch over to a full IDE? Honestly, my opinion is when it feeds your spirit. Try them, see how you like it. I do a lot of basic work in VS Code. A lot of people bling out VS Code with all kinds of cool features. I've changed my theme here. This is my Beyonce theme. But I use Visual Studio when I do a lot of web work and a lot of Azure work. So really just try them both. You can go to visualstudio.com/free, and you can install it for free. So yeah, Karen in the chat is saying that you could write code in Vim, VI or Emacs. There's all kinds of different ways to do it. But C# can be written in both. And because we like these notebooks, we're going to write them in here. We'll switch over maybe tomorrow to Visual Studio and compare.
Yeah.
Okay? That's a good idea. All right. So now we had talked about strong typing. So talking about strong typing, but I think in TypeScript and in JavaScript, they have a thing called var. And this is new to C#, newish, last couple of years. Check this out. See how I didn't put int or string or char or whatever. I'm just saying var. What this is doing, it looks like it's loose. Like you were talking about how JavaScript's like, yeah, whatever.
Yep.
It's not loose. It just means figure it out now. But once it's figured out, it's stuck. So let's look at var foo. That's clearly a string, right?
Yes.
It's a string. So if I hover over foo, it says string. Okay. And this is clearly a number, so it's probably an int. So I'll hover over int. Okay. Now let's try to take foo, which we've just made a string right here. And then we'll say foo equals 99.
It's not
Can't do it. Yes. So it's trying to give people the kind of comfort of making a variable whenever, But once it's set, once its type is set, I can change the value, right? I could say foo equals Scott. So once it's a string, I can mess with string. But once the type has been set, I can't say I equals Scott because we decided already that I is an int. So have you ever heard the term syntactic sugar?
Yes.
It's just a little sugar. They just sprinkled a little sugar on it. So var is just a little kind of sugar that makes things easier. Terry Andre in the chat is asking what the scope of it is. It's the same scope as any other variable. So this I is going to live for, inside of a function, or in this case, in the cell and beyond. So it's the exact same scope as anything else. So there's literally no difference between going like this, or going like that. It is sugar. I kind of think it's cool. Some people don't like it because they're like, I don't know what a foo is. And the problem is later on, you start scrolling away and someone uses foo and you're like, what is a foo? You got to go back and figure it out, right? So you can always just hover your mouse and it'll tell you that it's got a type, but this is just sugar, but you can't change it afterwards. All right, now what is this thing mad about here? There we go. So here we're calling a function. There's a function that's built in called display. We're passing in that variable name. Every single thing in C# can be turned into a string at the time of displaying it. So if I were going to go and give it like I, which we know is an integer, it's going to output that number. It's going to turn it into a string and then spit it out. I could say I dot toString. I'm taking I'm calling the toString method, but I don't need that. It's kind of implied.
Mm-hmm.
But every object in C# can be a string whenever they feel like it. Okay. All right. Let's get into some meat. We talked about typecasting. We saw this part here. I can take a number like a decimal or a long number, and I can say, no, I really want you to be an integer. I really want you to be a string. But when we do that, of course, we could lose precision. We talked a little bit about operators yesterday. We were plussing strings, and plussing things, adding things is super interesting because if in this example here we have apples and oranges, right? So we're going to add them together or subtract them. What if I made apples a string? So now I'm going to add a string to a decimal. Okay. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So apples is a string, oranges is a decimal. It worked, which kind of feels right. Here's a question though. What if we did oranges plus apples? Yeah, that worked too. So go ahead.
What if we had an int?
Oh, good one. Okay, so let's do ints plus decimals. Okay. And this is what's great about notebooks, right? Notebooks lets you go and do these things, right? So what if we had that? Now we're really mixing types here. Okay.
Okay.
Let's try flipping it around. See if the order of things matters. Oh.
Or integers and strings.
Yeah, so let's do integers and strings. Let's make this one an integer and let's make that one. No, it's working. So it's trying to do the right thing, right? It's trying to do the right thing because ultimately it's going to turn into a string. There are times when if I were to go and take the result of this, let's go back and let's say decimal 3.5, let's say, and I go and add that, I'll expect to see 13.5. If I went like this, now this is going to get a little weird because there's going to be a lot of parentheses, int. So this is just like algebra where you put parentheses around stuff to tell you the order. I'm saying add these up, which we know is 13.5, and then make the result an int. Take it all up, make it an int, and then we'll output the display. So you saw the 0.5 just got chopped.
And had we not been using the display method, these things wouldn't add as easily. But because the display method is already converting them to strings, it's going to add.
Let's find out. So display is a method that's built in. Let's try console.writeLine,
Mm-hmm.
which isn't a thing, which is built in. The display is part of notebooks. So that's a great question. So let's do that. Nope. So it looks like it doesn't have anything to do with that. Now, remember yesterday, you had a great point yesterday where you said, what about splitting this up? Let's put it on another line. Remember how we said, do you need to put these things all in one line? Let's do this. Because this is, a lot more clear. And it lets you see the number for a second. So let's try this. Nope. So it's not being done by this. It's not display. It's not WriteLine. It's what's called the type system is doing the work. It's doing the work as best it can. If I get rid of this int, which we'll get rid of our parentheses as well, we're adding a int and a double. I think this one's a double. I think you have to put an M to make it a decimal. A decimal is just an even bigger, longer number. It's an even crazier number. The result is the same. Now here, look at this. Int plus decimal equals decimal, because a decimal is the only thing that could hold a decimal and an int.
Okay.
They automatically make the biggest type to fit it because they don't want you to lose your data. But if we made this an int, it's probably going to say, look, this whole thing here, apples plus oranges, that's going to be big. I can't fit that into an int. So they really try to make sure that you don't what's called lose precision. Back in the day, I would be losing precision all the time. You'd accidentally, lose a 0.5 10 lines back, and you wouldn't find out about it till it was way too late. Terry Andre in the chat is asking, did the display function take place of console.writeLine? Exactly. So display was a function that was built in. So I could say display result. That's part of Notebook. So that's a function that was available to us. We'll get a little bit more into functions in a bit. So display and console.writeLine are doing the same thing. See, here's console.writeLine. Here's display. Display is a function that's built into notebooks. So yes, we could even make our own function that turned it a certain color, or made it boldface or whatever. So we'll make some functions in a little bit. But we got tired of typing console.writeLine over and over again. So yeah, Abhishek's asking the same question. Display in this context is console.writeLine in a short form. Yeah. Karen's asking the question about this M. You mentioned this last time too, because this is weird. If we look at oranges is a decimal. Why? Well, decimals are really big numbers. If I remove the M here, oranges goes back to a double. That's because this number 3.5 isn't big enough for C# to guess that this is going to be a huge number. Now, if I did something like this, maybe that's going to be impressive enough that it's going to turn it into, something else. So you can put a specifier at the end. There's a bunch of type specifiers.
So like D, M.
Yeah, you're exactly. You said D, M. So there's C# type specifiers, integer, or number, maybe number standard numeric form, value types. Here we go. All the docs have this stuff, and yeah, you had mentioned D and M. Types, floating point, numeric types. Yeah, here we go. Okay. So yesterday we saw floats, or let you do 9 digits, right? Ish. Double gets more, and decimal gets even more. And if you want to be specific, yeah, here we go. There it is. E for double, F for float, and M for whatever
got
decimal. Probably because of the M. They probably ran out of stuff. But F for float and D for double makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah. So here, they're just adding that little number at the end, and that's kind of convincing it. Like here, this is a good example. 3. That's probably going to be an int. but we're going to go and force it. We're going to be specific, and we're going to say that is in fact a decimal. So that's good stuff. Good questions, my friends. Yeah. So Karen, exactly. So Karen nailed it in the chat here. Karen Y says we're using the M because we're not explicitly pointing out the type. If I didn't have that M, that decimal is going to turn into a int, or go like that, and then I actually explicitly do it. So I love that our friends in the chat are following along.
Scott, I want to bring us back to the console.writeLine and this display and adding these things together. Could we add a string in here with an integer or decimal and see the difference between what is printed out?
Sure, let's do it. Okay, so we've got a new string, and we could go and say apples plus Sharita plus oranges. Ooh. No? Oh, I got, yeah, okay, so look at this.
You didn't run it.
I didn't run it yet.
Mm-hmm.
There you go, good catch. Look at that.
Wow, okay.
Okay. So this is really interesting. And I love that you did this because it was 13.5 a minute ago.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Ooh, look at that. Ooh, we found something I didn't even think about.
There
Plus,
we go.
Okay, nice. You wanted to see a type error.
Yes, I was waiting for. I'm like,
you were trying to walk me into a type error. Okay, this is great. So Sharita very cleverly has got me adding a double and a decimal, and those are two numbers that are so big and so different that it's like, listen, you got to pick a type. I can't plus apples and oranges. This is good stuff. Let me try two doubles. Can we do that? Yes,
yep,
we can. But yeah, you knew what you were doing. So you said decimal. Those are two types that are so different that we can't really do that. And now we're getting weird here. So we'll go and we'll try to actually add apples and oranges. But were we able to put in a name at the same time? This will probably be okay because we're not actually adding them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We're turning them into strings.
Yep.
Joe Green says, "Oh, Sharita, you sly goose." This kind of experimentation, this kind of like challenging your assumptions is what's great about playing with notebooks and what's great about playing around in Visual Studio Code in this way, because again, Sharita's coming at this from a TypeScript perspective. And that's why it's fun to talk with you, because it's like you grew up with a different language, right? Yeah. So I'm teaching one language. You're like, well, yeah, but the language I grew up with doesn't behave like that. And your language, TypeScript and JavaScript underneath it, does other weird stuff. Like if you were teaching me TypeScript, I would be like, hang on, that's super weird. Yep. And then you would tell me about all the weirdness that exists in the JavaScript world.
They have a lot of similarities, though, outside of the JavaScript side of it, but it forces us to, pay attention like this, like we have to in C# and kind of be strongly type.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And you're pointing out something really important, which you have to pay attention. The computer's going to do exactly what you tell it to do. And if you don't pay attention, if you're not explicit, then it's just going to make some assumptions, right? It's going to expense some assumptions. So this is a great question. Terry Andre in the chat says, let's hover over result, because here we've got a double, we've got a string, we've got a decimal, and Terry says it's going to be string. So let's hover over result. Yep. So the compiler has figured that out. We didn't even have to run it for it to figure out. So this is kind of what's called type coercion. It's figuring out the types for us. It's inferring it. And if it needs to, it's coercing things into the right type. So that worked out really nicely. Good stuff.
Very good.
Abhishek is asking what's on my name there. That's a taco, my friend. That is says Scott Hanselman taco on my name right here, because everyone loves tacos. All right, so this operator plus means, you can add strings, you can add things together, but it doesn't imply necessarily adding, because if it was a bunch of strings, we'd be concatenating or plugging the strings onto each other. All right, cool. So here's where it gets weird. Can I multiply these things? Probably not. These are big numbers. I don't know if this is going to work. Yeah. See, this is where you walked me into it before. Your types kind of have to agree. And then we can talk about very, very briefly type overflows, because when we were over there in the documentation, we saw how many digits these things allow. If I'm going to multiply doubles together, we could get some really big numbers.
Yeah.
And you can run out of space. You can run out of space. Now, these are cool. These are some of my favorite things here. Let's go back up here, and I'm going to put these back into integers for the purposes of what we're going to talk about. Now, just make it a little simpler. Go back down here. These are great. Apples plus equals. Okay, so they're mad at me about
that one is
that one. That's a division. I'm going to get rid of that just to make us move on here. So apples is 10. Oranges is 3. Look what's happening. So this here, when you say apples plus equals, you are saying apples equals apples plus 10. This is just shorthand. Oops. This is just shorthand for doing a thing that we do a lot. You might also see, and I know you've probably done this before, is apples plus plus.
Yes.
Right. That's just like increment. So you find yourself in a loop and you're making one more. And what's interesting here is that this is displaying the value. And this is not a good thing, by the way. This is not a good practice. We're changing the value of apples every time this runs.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. So there's a side effect inside here, right? And this gets to the point that you'd made before. This is a good opportunity to put this around. Let's go ahead and just make a variable result to, oops. There we go. I always forget my semicolons. You do the thing, store it, and then do it. But here, the numbers are changing as I move around. So don't make changes to your app's variables in the middle of displaying them. But yeah, so plus equals, minus equals, times equals. Those are shortcuts. Those are conveniences. Then we can test for equality. Is this greater than? We know that apples, I think, is like probably a huge number right now. This is a good one. Greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. Here is equal to and not equal to. Now, I think TypeScript has a triple equal thing.
Yes, we do.
We don't have that. We don't have that in our world. Okay. Yeah. Abhishek in the chat is saying that apples plus equals 10 right here should be a statement and it's an expression. So in that case here, there's a side effect when you do that kind of stuff. So you got to think about those things. It has a side effect. And we saw that double equals is how we check for equality, and not equals. This is called a bang. If someone sends you bang mail, that's like they sent you a mail with like importance. And this means not equal to. So we can see false and true. So it is true that apples is not equal to oranges. All right. Oh, Todd Martin, is there a way to reset the notebook to the original state if you muck things up? Love it. Yes. So go back up to our main page. Okay. And we put a link to the notebook right here. You can either, hit undo, Control Z, or you can get that notebook. You can download it again right there. And if you click on this, it will open up in Visual Studio Code, and then you can just save the notebook away. And remember that notebook is just a file. It's just a text file. So if you want to copy that somewhere, make a copy, download it yourself, put it somewhere, you can definitely do that. So yeah, you can always get back to where you were before. Good question. Now I can actually just hit Control Z and I can get myself back. All right, loops. Loops, my friends, loops. This is where we lose people. This is where programming gets hard. in my opinion, because you start adding in parentheses and these little curly dealies. Someone told me if you turn your head a certain way, it looks like a mustache.
Huh. It does.
I don't see it. I mean, you think maybe like an old-timey 1920s person
Yes.
mustache? Okay. So let's take a look at what's going on here. So we're saying seconds, which it looks like is going to be an integer, and we're taking date time. Date time is built into the .NET ecosystem. It's basically an available thing. It's in another class called datetime. And if I say datetime and I hit dot, these are all the things datetimes can do. Like is leap
Nice.
year is like a free function. So we've got today and we've got now available to us in datetime as functions that we can use. And what we're going to do here is we're going to call datetime.now. Let's break this up into pieces.
Okay.
I'm going to remove the dot second. Datetime.now returns what? It returns a date time. So seconds now is an object called a date time. So let's call that now. And then I can say now dot, and that's going to have the date,
same.
the day, right? Hour. So datetime.now made me a date time. It made me one that is now. And it's a snapshot of now, right? It's not going to be changing. It's not going to have, the seconds aren't going to move. It's stuck at what it is. Terry says loops, yuck. Yeah, that's where it gets real, is the loops. So here we've got all kinds of stuff. Date times are really complicated, but they're fun because they do stuff for you that you don't have to do yourself. You can ask if it's a leap year or not and things like that. So we said now dot seconds. This is on 2 lines, but I can make this on 1 line. I can put it back the way it was. Okay, so we're going to get the second of now and put it in a variable called seconds. Right now it's 55, and I'm just going to click it. 58, 59, 0. Now we got a new minute. 1, 2, 3. So I'm just clicking this button really fast. Okay.
Okay.
We're displaying the current seconds. And the question is the current seconds even or odd? Okay. So seconds is a integer. And this is weird. I hated this when I learned about this because it didn't make any sense. It's called the modulus.
I loved it.
You love modulus? Okay, then you can help me understand here. So we're dividing seconds in half and then seeing if it divided cleanly?
Yes. If there's no remainder.
Okay. So let's do this. This is a great point. Let's do Sharita's trick. Remainder in another variable. We'll pull this out and give it its own line. If you want to understand stuff, that's a good way to do it. And then we'll put remainder down here. Okay. See if this is going to squiggle on me or if we're going to be okay. Okay, cool. All right, so the remainder is seconds divided, or it's divided by 2, but it's not the result. It's not that. I'm not cutting it in half. I'm cutting it in half and giving the remainder to you. Okay. So let me think about this. 25 cut in half is 12 and a half, or 12. And it's 12 remainder 1. I got you. So then the remainder, actually, let's do that. Can we do this? And actually, you know what we can do? We can do our string trick. We can put a $sign here.
Yeah.
Yeah, here we go.
Oh, look at there.
I like that better than the plus. And then I'll put my semicolon at the end. Yep, just like you said.
Boom.
So remainder is 1. Therefore, if it's the case that remainder is 0, display seconds are even, and then there's no else. We don't do anything. I could probably do this. Go ahead.
Or we can just probably check for is even, a variable is even as a bool. And
yeah, so we could make a function around that if we wanted
yeah.
to. We could wrap this and we could make a thing I wonder how we can do this in, I don't know if that's possible in notebooks. I've not done this before. Bool is even, integer. So I'm making a function that returns
Oh,
a
a
bool,
function. Okay.
right? Just bang out. I don't know if this, I haven't done this before in notebooks, but let's find out because this is a good thing. So we'll say our remainder. So int will be something, I don't know, I, and then we'll say return I mod 2. So if mod, is it even? I don't know. Is it going to let me do this?
Oh, if. So if
Oh,
instead
yeah.
of return,
Sorry, yeah.
and
No,
then return true.
I think that's right. This expression will be, but I wouldn't. Not all code pass. Oh, it's the thing. No, it's not.
Okay.
It's not the if. I think this will work. I just wasn't sure if I could just bang out a function in the middle right here. So then is even remainder. Let's see if this works. Make this a little smaller. I can't see everything now. Yep. Yeah, it works. Okay, so you can make a random function.
We have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Why the double equals versus the one?
Ah, that's great. That's a great question from Nathan in the chat. So if I say I equals 2, and then display I, or var, actually I should have to give it a var I. So I made a variable called I. Here's the value, it's 2. I here assigned the number 2 to the value I. I need to be able to differentiate between I'm putting a number in here. We could have done that like an arrow, but we did equals. A double equals means I'm checking for equality. So let's say I equals 2, and then I'm going to say display I equals 2. Here I'm assigning it. I made I equals 2. And here I'm asking a question. I'm saying, is I equals 2?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to get the value true. It is the fact that I is true. Now, watch this. What if I said display I equals 3? Well, it's getting freaked out. Can't do that. And that would be a side effect anyway. It would change the value of I and then display it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So equals is checking for comparison, and a single equals is assigning. Great question. Abhishek is asking if C# has a ternary operator. That's pretty advanced, but we can do that in just a second. That's a great question. Joe Green is asking about if they wanted to add else. Yes, we could absolutely do that. We could say else, and then we'll put odd down here. All right, and let's do that. See if that works. We're getting the function's getting big, so I have to make things smaller. Oh, look at that. See, seconds are even, seconds are odd, seconds are even, seconds are odd. So else is working. Now here's an interesting question. You see how we have this little mustache here, this little curly brace? There's all kinds of controversy about this. Do you put yours here, Rita, or do you put yours over here? Or do you
It
care?
depends. Yeah. So when I'm in Visual Studio 2019, it automatically goes down to the next, and it looks better. It does look cleaner.
Yeah, I like it like that.
But if I am coding on my own, doing something else, it's going immediately after the parentheses.
See? And then some people do this.
Oh, now that one, no.
Yeah, so that you draw the line at that
Yeah.
point. You're like, this is unacceptable, right? We're getting out of control.
Yeah.
So this is confusing to people who just get started. So our friends on the chat, these things don't matter. This is a really good point. On C#, white space in the thing, you can make some janky looking code and it'll all just run anyway. It just looks, look, I moved it all over. This looks like trash. People freak out. You can make this whole thing all on one line if you wanted to be that person. And someone might say, well, that's way better. I don't know about you, but I find that a little hard to read.
Yeah, I like multiple lines. So
Right. Yeah, it's a little free form. Additionally, and this can be a little confusing if you're just getting started, is if you don't have more than one line, if you have just one line, these braces here aren't needed.
oh,
Yeah, so this is weird. That works. That works. It only works because that's one line. Okay, now here's where it goes bad. What if I wanted to do this? Is this part of the else? Or is it just chilling on its own? Right, we can test that. We can test that. I'm just going to keep hitting play. See how great job is there, whether it's even or odd? We are tricking you by putting it here, but it's not part of the else. It's not part of the else. You only get one line. So if you don't put your curly braces, you just get that one line. If I wanted it to be, yeah, if I wanted it to be a part of the else, I need to give it a hug. And
I like that.
You like that? Huh?
Yeah.
Right. Now, Abhishek in the chat is pointing out that in Python, which is another language, that would work because white space and indentation matters in Python. But in C# it does not. Even if I went like this, it doesn't matter. Great job is always happening because the else without the curly. So you really want to have your curlies. You got to have your curlies. You give a hug to the statements that you want to use. So that's super important. Good reminder. Not intuitive, right? Until it becomes intuitive. Isn't that interesting? Joe is saying that they prefer seeing him like this. I think we agree that that's kind of nice. Some people say that you can tell what generation someone is from based on where they put these things. Old timers like to put things up here. But maybe that's a JavaScript thing. I don't know. But I like them like this. But you can pick the style. And when you join a team, you're going to inherit their style, and you're just going to use the style that you'll decide as a team. But doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, and that's cool. Okay. All right. So we've learning about our ifs and our elses. You can also do another if. You can say else if, and then have another thing. We could say if odd or whatever. That's cool. We learned that we can put functions in the middle. We kind of did this fast. We didn't really talk about this too much. We went and we spontaneously made a function that returns a bool, takes an integer. We named it whatever we want. You noticed that, like you mentioned yesterday, we did camel casing kind of without even thinking about it. And you had made a comment real quick where you had thought maybe we put if right here. And that feels like it might be intuitive. It might be intuitive. That would be a place to put an if.
If, and then I'll return true. I thought that's the train of thought that I had, but you don't. So that's more lines.
Is a good one. That's a great point, because that feels like, from an English perspective, something that'd be cool. And I've seen people want to like do this, like return if. That would be kind of cool if that was a thing. But the trick is that this part that I've selected is an expression.
Yes. Yep.
And that expression can be put into variables. Let's just make a variable here. We'll call it, I don't know, return value. Okay, so I'm going to say return value, and I'm going to assign it this expression. This is a question. If we did this, that's going to result in a number, a remainder, like you said. But this is a question implied. It's a yes/no question. So retval is going to become a Boolean. So now yes or no, true or false is in there. And when we do that, there's no if. We're not asking an either or question. We're just returning the result. The if actually in this case is kind of, the question is here in the equal sign.
Yep.
Yeah, good stuff. Ooh, now here's the thing. Now Abhishek made the comment before what we called the ternary. Ternary. This is a little advanced, but this is kind of fun. You'll use this every once in a while, but I like doing the if like this. So what Abhishek, I believe, is asking for is a terser or a crisper way to do something like this. Let me see if I can remember how to do this. Display. We're going to call display. And I'm going to say, I'm going to ask a question. And our question, as you remember, was is even. And we'll pass in a number, seconds. Okay, so there's our thing here. I'm actually going to go on. Here, let's do this. Remember comments?
Yes.
Yeah, let's comment that out.
Multiple lines.
Okay. Yeah, multiple line comment. So let's comment that out. I'm going to get rid of our remainder here. We've got is even up there. So we're doing our seconds. Let's make sure if everything runs. So right now, we're just displaying the word false, or we're displaying the word true. Now, if we want to do something about it, this is weird, but it's the same thing as what's at below. We're going to put a question mark.
This is what we do.
You do this? Is this a
Yes,
thing?
I love this.
You like this? Okay. Look at that. See that? Okay, so Sharita likes this. So expression, true or false. If it's true, do this. If it's false, do that. So I read this as like, huh. Okay. That's how I read that.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's straightforward versus
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So Joe Green says, yeah, so ternary is like shorthand. It is. It's a shorthand. That's an operator. So we saw that a plus is an operator and a times is an operator. That's a shorthand. So we just took all of this and turned it into this kind of like one-liner here. And the ternary operator starts with that question mark. I'll make that a little bigger. And what it is it's something. Let's go ahead and remove this. Let's just put in true. Let's just say true. So is this going to ever equal even? Let's find out. Yep, it's always even. True is always true. Change it to false. Always odd. Okay, so I'm going to go Control Z. I'm hitting Control Z. That's my undo. Now we got it. So we're calling this function and anything that comes out of here. Now let's get rid of that function. Let's go back. Let's go back and do seconds divided by 2. Does it have a remainder? I'm going to get rid of all of this.
So
still works because we got rid of that function, which may have been a mistake, but and we put the expression in here. That this, I think, is where, in my opinion, it started to get confusing. And I like your idea of having a function because I can't read that without kind of going, oh, okay, I see. Right? There's a moment there where you're like, oh, okay, I see what they're doing. What made that easier to read, I thought, was having the function named something good. We named it, right?
What about just having the variable when we put remainder?
Yeah, that's a good point. So that's a great point. So if I took this chunk here and I said var remainder equals this, we get rid of the function.
And then check if there's a remainder. And
okay, then we would say remainder.
So then we'll have to probably so
I want to see am I getting is this working? I don't feel like something ain't right.
Yeah, I feel that way too. So this is
I haven't seen odd here.
because it's always
it's always coming out true here.
Because we set the
Maybe our
remainder.
friends in the chat are gonna.
So there's already an expression. So right now we're saying, this is even. It's already, that's
So
always even.
Let's display remainder. And let's see what's going on. This is our debugging
Which
here. We're going
is
to just output this.
true.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's
it's true.
always true. It's always true. Oh, you know why? Okay. Here, this is great. We get the seconds. What's I?
Oh yeah, that's from our
What's
function.
I?
Yeah.
What's
Second.
I is from way up in the. We didn't even think about I.
Yeah.
I is
Second.
not a thing. There it is. Good deal. See?
There we go. Cool.
There we go. Now, our friends in the chat, Todd Martin, saying that he liked the ternary plus a comment in the code. These are the kind of things you got to ask yourself. But we just did this 3 different ways, and it worked every time. That's pretty cool. We're learning a lot. We're just playing around with ifs and expressions. We didn't even get yet to loops, which are coming up tomorrow on Notebook right here. So that is right here. And we were somewhere in the middle of that notebook yesterday. We talked about data types and casting. We did some cool things with ifs and elses. We noticed that sometimes these lock openers, these braces matter, and sometimes they don't. Had an interesting discussion about whether or not they belong lined up or whether they belong at the end of the line. And sometimes they don't even matter, which is super interesting. But I think what's really fun about what we did yesterday, Shrita, was that we explored, and in both of us, yourself a TypeScript programmer, myself a C# programmer, we're like, I don't know if it does work like that or not. So we tried it. We asserted our assumptions. We looked at our guesses and we're like, oh, okay, maybe it does work like that. Oh, maybe it doesn't work like that. And I learned a lot yesterday. I felt pretty good about it.
Yeah, so did I.
Yeah. Doesn't always work the way you think it does, but it should be pretty deterministic, and it should work the same way every time. So let's see where we were here. We were messing around. I think we spent most of our time at the end of yesterday doing this here.
Yep.
Looking at the number of seconds of now and looking at whether or not that seconds was even. And then we were just getting ready before we ran out of time to talk about how ifs and elses can get really complicated. This is a pretty chaotic looking thing here. If this, else, 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 else. This final else is kind of the when all else fails else.
Yep.
Right? If none of that is true, we drop down into this else here. And then a little farther down, we saw we could do things like yesterday we made you suggested an is even, and we made a function. Here we've got another example, multiple of 3. These can be named any way that you want. This example just says I return yes or no, true or false, a Boolean, and here's my name. And this function can use the other functions. We could use display and whatnot. And then we talked about how this is an expression.
Yep.
You don't have to say return if, you just return the expression, and that right there evaluates to true or evaluates to false. And then this is interesting. Here we can use that inside of another expression. I can ask questions. If it's even, and here's your and, it's a multiple of 3. So these ifs and ands can get pretty complicated pretty quickly, and then you have to decide. We have to decide whether it's going to be readable or not. Like maybe this would be more readable if it said if is even and multiple of 3, right? That'd be cool.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, one of the folks on our chat earlier in our comments yesterday was making the comment that order of evaluation, like the order that these things happen, is important. This is a little bit detailed, but depending, every language is a little different. But here's an or. Here's an or rather than an and. So you say if seconds is divisible by 2, or it's a multiple of 3. If this is true, we don't need to check the second thing because We only need one thing to be true. And this is a really
Mhm.
interesting side effect, right? It's called short circuit evaluation. It's like, like if you're over 18 and you're over 21, well,
Mhm.
you're over 18, like you're cool. So come into the club.
Yeah.
If you're divisible by 2, we don't even bother looking at the second one here. So these ifs and ands can be really interesting. If you don't need the second one to be true, you short circuit and you're like, no, you're good. I saw your ID. Come into the club.
Mhm.
Now, switch statements are very powerful, but a really great example of a thing that a lot of people get confused about. A lot of people don't like switch statements, and they get pretty hairy, and they can be abused. I'm sure you've probably inherited some code that you
Yep.
didn't write that had some switch statements that will make your eyes bleed.
Many, many, many. Yeah.
What is it about switch statements that people want to abuse them?
I don't know. Maybe because it's the readability, maybe because there are more words versus.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, they're not terse. They look like big old paragraphs, but somehow we keep finding ourselves into situations where it's like you have to scroll and it's like, wow, I have to fit. Look at this. Look how big that is. But
Massive.
I get what they're doing though, like how else could you make this cleaner? But it just sometimes switch statements are a lot. So with a switch statement here, we're going to say, what's the day of the week? Remember before we took seconds. Here
Mhm.
we're going to say day of the week. And then we say switch, which day of the week? Is it the case that it's Monday? Do some stuff. And then break out.
Mhm.
Now I have this song from the 80s, Break Out, in my head. If it's the case that it's Tuesday, do something and break out. If you don't have this break, if this break isn't here, then it'll fall, it'll keep going, it'll keep falling down, 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 down. So you have to decide if you want to break out or not. It wouldn't be a big deal with these cases because it can't be Monday and Tuesday at the same time.
Mhm.
But you could have a thing be like, if it's the case that it's greater than 2, and it could be the case that it's greater than 2, and it's greater than 3, and it's greater than 4, and multiple case statements could be the case. It's the case that all these things are true. So you got to be intentional about, are we going to break out of our case? And these indentations, the fact that it's kind of indented, it doesn't matter. Remember, we saw yesterday that the white space doesn't matter.
Mhm.
But it's nice to be intentional about lining these things up. So people kind of like to make their switch statements kind of look like this. And it makes it a little easier to read.
Yeah, for sure. It looks clean
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, it does look clean. Now, here's a nice one. Here's an example of exactly what I just talked about. What's going on here? Switch on the day of the week. If it's the case that any of these things are true, we got all these can all be, oops, I need to work on my screen drawing. If it's the case that any of these are true, or the case that it's Friday before work ended, all right? Here we're saying before, I think this means 16, so this must mean 4 o'clock, like 24-hour time.
Okay, got it.
That's what I'm thinking here. So it's before 4, then we're going to work. And this could be a big if statement, couldn't it? Right? If it's Monday,
Yes.
or it's Tuesday, or it's Wednesday, and that would be pretty ridiculous looking. It would look pretty hairy. So I think this is a good example of a switch statement that is clearer than an if, but it does the
Okay.
same thing. It does the same thing, right? Now, Terry Andre is asking, let's talk about the format of the case. That's a good question here. Let's look at that. So when you are doing a switch, you're going to switch on a thing. Like here's a variable. It could be switching on I. It could be switching on day of the week. It could be switching on whatever. So Terry's question is, explain the format of the case. We've got a variable that we're going to enter the switch statement, and it's going to decide, am I going to turn left? Am I going to turn right? Which of the cases are we going to look at? This here is the thing you want to check against. This can be another variable. It can be, in this case here, day of week is a variable that was already kind of hanging around waiting for us here. And we're just using that because day of week, we hover over the variable here, is actually a data type. Hang on, I'm going to sneeze.
Oh, bless
Oh
you.
my, excuse me. So day of week is a data type that we've never seen before. We've seen integers and we've seen strings, but day of week is what's called an enumeration because there's 7 days in the week. And day of week is a variable type. And it's not that this is special, our friends in the chat and Terry. This is just a data type here. So let's pretend that day of the week was a string. We're going to pretend it was a string. Then this would just say Monday, Tuesday, right? Then we'd be looking at this string and we check this. But let's say that day of week was an integer, like 1 for Monday and 2 for Tuesday. Then it would look like this. So the reason that it looks like this with this dot is just because day of the week is a thing. And we can actually go up here and we'll just make some space and I'll just type day of week and press dot and it's going to pop open. See? And that's the stuff that this enumeration, this enum, E-N-U-M, you can go and search for enum if you want. It has those things. So that's why that has that dot there. But that's not specific to cases. That's just how you would do things here. So it could be what any of those things. You could switch on any of those things. Okay. You wouldn't want to do this. You could go like this. You could say turn it into a string. And then here would be one Monday, right? But you don't. There's no reason to turn it into a string and then do a bunch of string comparisons. Good question. Thank you, Terry. See if I broke it. See if it's still working. Yep. Friday's almost here. So, for loops. For loops. This one right here, I would probably say when I learned programming back in the day, I stared at that. You probably don't do a lot of those in TypeScript, right? You do for each probably more, I would think, right?
No, we
You do
still do them
for
like
each?
this too.
You still do them like this too? This has been like this forever. So C is a language that came before C#, right? And
Yeah.
before C++. It's like the Latin of C languages, right? It's the original. And they've been doing for loops like this for 50 years. And people get really stuck on these. And it might be worth kind of breaking this apart to make this real big. Talk about this because for loops can confuse a lot of folks. And I'm just going to make a little space here. We already know that the curly brace doesn't matter, so we just move that out of the way so we don't get stressed out. And here's the part that is the trick about for loops that no one talks about. They put it all on one line like this, but like philosophically, here's what's going on. No one ever breaks them up because you wouldn't do that because you want to, like you said, you like a nice clean line of code. That ternary operator we saw yesterday, I know you love that. There's a new variable called counter. We'll start out at 5. Here's the part that everybody goes south on. What's going on here is this is a implied if. It's an expression again. Yeah, that's the thing. You know what's up. Counter's 5. If it's the case that it's greater than 0, and if it's basically while it's still doing that, we'll keep going. Otherwise, break out.
Yep.
And then here we're saying counter equals counter minus 3, but we're doing it with that shorter deal right there. A lot of times we'll see something like this. Var I equals 1, I is less than 5, and then they'll go I plus plus.
Yep.
Right, and that's kind of the one we all learn on right there. And then we'll go display I. See if I broke it. There you go. There's our 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's our I right here. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I always get stuck here. You know, the old joke about programming is that there's somebody said that there's 3 things about programming that are hard. 3 things: naming stuff,
Okay.
and off by 1 errors.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with that.
3 things:
What's
naming
the
stuff
thing? Uh-huh.
and off by 1 errors. It's a programming joke. I'm off by 1. I counted 2
Oh.
instead of 3. See, every programmer joke is a groaner. You know what's up. Every
That's
programmer joke
hilarious.
that's like
That's
a
a good
programmer
one.
dad joke. Yeah.
But don't
So because don't you always have a situation where like, okay, I'm going to show a number from 1 to 5. Cool. All right, let's go, everybody.
mm-hmm.
1, 2, 3, 4. And then you kind of like figure out it's off by 1. It's always, oh, I should have started at 0, or oh, I should have started at whatever.
Or
Let's
make it
go
equal
from 0
to.
to 5, right? 0 to 5.
Okay.
I'm going to delete this. We'll play that. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Boo.
Okay, so then I got to figure out there's multiple ways to solve this. I can go like this, and then I could say, well, I want to go I less than or equals to 5.
Mm-hmm. That'll get you
Right. Or, and then this is stylistic, it doesn't matter, less than 6.
5.
It's going to get you the same result. It's going to get you the same result. But I think that's pretty clear.
That's,
I
yeah,
like that.
I
You agree?
like that too. Mm-hmm.
But for the newbies, for our friends on the show here who are maybe just getting started, this is definitely where you're off by 1 error is going to happen. Whenever you're spinning through a million of something, oh, I did 1,000,001. Oh, I did 999,000. These are the problems that happen. Okay, but the thing to remember about for loops in C# or any C language, JavaScript, whatever, it's really doing this. It's breaking apart into 3. Set up, ask the question, and then do the thing after you're done.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. And this is our opportunity. This is our moment to stop. That's our moment to get out of there. All right. So for loops are great. For loops can get pretty hairy. Here's something that took me a while to figure out, because I just said that's our chance to get out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unless I decide to bail and make my own exit.
Yes.
Remember that break we did in the switch statement? It's explicit. It's like, nope, I've got another case that I'm going to use, that I'm going to jump out. So I'm going to break explicit. I'm going to make my own exit. I don't care what's going on here. Something happened in the middle, and I want to get out. So right here, we've got a counter that's going to go forever. That's another thing that happens in programming, isn't it? You make a loop, and then it's like, I can't get out. It's going to happen forever.
Mm-hmm.
This will happen while this is greater than 0, which will be forever, because it's just going to keep getting bigger. So this person's going and saying, all right, if it's greater than 10, then I'll leave. They could have put that 10 up here, but they decided to make their own exit down here. Because you never know. Something might happen. Could be an error. Things could break, and you got to bail. But the result is still the same. Okay. Now, these are the loops. I love my for each loops. I just think it's easier to read. When for each loops came out, I just thought that for each was just the greatest thing ever, because this is where, when programming feels like language, like English, for each name in array of names. I like that.
I guess I don't think I've ever really been a fan.
Really? Okay. Well, that's good. Let's compare.
Maybe you can change my mind though right now. So
I appreciate that. Well, this is where we have different opinions, because yesterday we were talking about how the ternary operator is when you say, like, if something true : false, and I was saying, I don't know, that feels weird, and you were like, oh, that's great, I love it. Everybody's got their own style. Terry's asking if we can put a display in the for loop and to check. Absolutely, yes. So any of these loops, you can put in displays. You can put in, here's a display in the middle of a for loop. You can absolutely check on those things. When we see a little bit later, we can do interactive debugging where we can actually stop the program and put our finger on that and check. But yes, you can do whatever you want in the for loop. For loop can get really complicated. Now, for each loops, which we're still on the fence, Sharita's still on the fence about whether she likes this or not, and take something that is, and this is a weird long word, enumerable. I think that adults hear words like this and they think, oh, now we're talking about computer stuff. We're making a computer word. It's complicated. But when I told my kids this, because kids have like more plastic brains, it's like, they're like, oh, it's something to do with numbers. And it's like, yeah, it's countable stuff. You can enumerate them, count them in order. And then they think that's a great word. They don't have in their minds like that's an easy word and that's a hard word. There's just all words, right? So enumerable, anything that can be enumerated, counted, can be for eached over.
Yep.
So as long as the thing that's here can be looped over, I don't have to think about numbers. It'll just go over in order. Okay. So ARR in this case means array. And remember how we said before, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you name these things. But someone decided that they wanted to name it ARR, whatever, so that later when they see it, they're like, oh yeah, that's an array. They could go like this. They could go like names. I like to do it like this. Look at this. This way you're actually using, you like that too?
Yeah, I like that.
Right. So you get singular and plural.
Yep.
It just feels right for each name in names, display names. That's when I think, nice programming kind of shines, you know what I mean? So let's put ourselves in here. Okay. So before we had said things like var something equals Scott. Here we're saying I'm going to make a new, out of nothing, a new string array. That right there made it an array. And an array is just a series of boxes. And you can say I want 9 of something or I want 1 of something. But if you leave it empty, you're saying I want as many as this is. It's like an open-ended. Give me a new string array and here's the contents. And again, everything on one line, but you see when you open it up, it's kind of nicer to read and you can even open it up even more. Totally up to you. Really important for folks on the chat, and I'd be interested if they're concerned about this. When you see stuff all on one line like this, I think it stresses people out. Nathan just joined. We absolutely have got all of this on the Reactor, and hopefully I'll be able to put these on my YouTube as well. So you'll be able to find these sessions in multiple places on a number of YouTubes. So we've got a new string array. When I see all of that with, I got the brackets and the curlies and the commas and that. It's not that stressful if you put it on multiple lines, absorb it, and then you're like, okay, I get what's going on here. Yeah. Now, see how we hover over name here. It's a string array, right?
Right.
This is where I think the var, and you have this, I think, you have var in TypeScript, right?
Yes.
That, right. Okay. So technically, this is what's happening. But the reason that var was made was that this, seeing it twice, I think is visually confusing. String array of names equals new string array. So var in this case says, you figure it out. So there was a lot of controversy when this came out. People were like, no, you got to be explicit. You got to be specific. But I think that looks way better.
I agree. Yeah.
If we go names dot, names has stuff like count. And these are array things. These are all array things. Is this a array with a certain length? Give me the min or the max or order this array. All kinds of stuff can happen when you've got an array. And the fact that it is enumerable, it can be enumerated, means that I can for each over it. Now, let's try this. from for each. I want to just do this in two ways. I want to show you that it's the same way. Remember how we can do things like this, where we have strings, right? Or we
Mm-hmm.
can go like this, which I think is cooler. Where we did our string
Mm-hmm.
trick there. Works. See how I keep hitting play, make sure it works? Okay, let's do the same thing as a for loop. Same exact thing. For int. Now, this can be anything, I, X, Y, whatever, it doesn't matter. People usually freak out about, like, what should that be?
So do you not want to use var instead, or
Oh,
why
that's a good point. That's a good point, actually. Yeah, I could do that. I could do that. Because if I have this part, yeah, it'll figure it out. Good point. And let's hover and see. It probably will. Yep, you're right. There's no reason. I guess it's just because I've always done it that way. Int's always been int. But yeah, that's a good point. I never thought about that.
That's because that's in, JavaScript, TypeScript.
Yep, that's a great point. That's a great point. So we're going to start at 0, and we're going to go through our array of names. And I is going to go until names dot length is at the end. And then we'll go to the next number. We'll go I++. And we'll open up our brace. We'll go display. And then I'll just copy this whole thing here. And we'll say not from for each, we'll say from for. And then we don't have name lying around anymore. We're in the middle of something else. I have to go and say names. Go and get me from the names at I. Right? At I. Let's see if this works. From for each. From for.
Nice.
Does the same thing. But you gotta say.
Yeah, I do, actually.
It's just easier to read.
Yeah, you're
Maybe
right.
I have converted you to the for each.
You're right. This is, it's more straightforward. Less work, less type.
Yep. And here's the thing. Let's say I accidentally said less than or equal. Okay. Ah!
Yeah.
Right? This right here is a classic example, in my opinion, of where a newbie, our friends maybe who are watching are going to be like, I'm a bad person. I screwed up. I made a mistake. Don't worry about all this. You worry about that another day. Even this is aggressive. That's kind of enough information. It's a little not friendly. It could be more friendly. But you had an array, and it had bound. It had a start and an end. And you went outside the bounds. You colored outside the lines. This right here where it says index, I think it'd be nice if it said I, but I is an index because we have these buckets, names at 0, names at 1, names at 2. So the index is going into the array and saying, give me the third one or the first one. And this is the other funny thing about programming, and C# isn't unique in this respect. Have you ever heard someone say zeroth? Get me the zeroth item out of the array.
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
It's like the first, but it's not the first, right? Because it's got to be the zeroth item. Zeroth, first, second.
Yes,
third.
yes.
Right. So this is a thing that also kind of confuses people that might be getting started. Names at I, the first one is at 0.
Yes.
And that's where we get our off by 1 errors, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah. So Terry says, can we do an array with someone inputting data? And, I think we can probably skip out here and let's go on to actually making an app. So we're going to leave our notebook for the first time and we're going to make an actual app, and we'll use Terry's question as an opportunity to actually take in some data. So for those of you who have been following along, or maybe you just joined, we went, of course, up here to .NET, Microsoft.com/learn-to-code. We got the developer tools, and we are currently working through the C# 101 notebook. I want to hear from you all in the comments here or on Twitter or anywhere in the feedback on the reactor here. Tell us if this is useful, and then we'll make a 200 level and a 300 level. We were thinking that it would be cool if we made courseware, like a whole college course, a whole university course in notebooks. And then y'all could download that and learn even more advanced stuff on your own. If you like that, let us know. If you want to get back, let's say I close this. I'm going to close all these tabs. So we're going to find ourselves kind of alone in Visual Studio wondering what to do, okay? So if you're in Visual Studio Code right now, if you're following along, hit Control-Shift-P. Control-Shift-P, and if you type Getting Started, if you have our .NET coding pack installed, you'll find the .NET Getting Started right here. Okay, .NET Getting Started, and that'll get you back into this world. Okay, but what we're going to do is I'm going to close Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to open up the terminal on my computer here. Now, you might use Windows Terminal, you might use, a number of different things. PowerShell, doesn't matter. But for simplicity's sake, people who are watching who might be following along, I'm just going to come out here and type command, and there's the thing called the command prompt, and I'm going to open up the command prompt, and that'll put you somewhere like this. I can't spend too much time here. Sharita and I don't have time to explain to y'all how to get out to the command line. So if that's a little advanced, I apologize. I'll show you another way in Visual Studio to make this easier. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say cd, change directory. I'm going to go to the root, and I'm going to type cd users. Then I know my name. Your name on your computer will be different. I'll go to my desktop, and I'm going to make a directory. Now there's a directory here for Sharita and I. You can make your directory if you want with your Windows Explorer, and you can make your directory. You can right-click and say, whatever. You can say new folder. It doesn't matter. But at the command line here, Scott and Sharita, I can type .NET. Now here's a little trick. If you use that coding pack, let me show you an even quicker way to get out to that terminal. So you're in Visual Studio. There's actually a button here, a menu that says Terminal. So for those of our friends that are in Visual Studio Code, say Terminal, New Terminal. Yours might look a little different than mine, okay? And now I'm going to go out to that Scott and Sharita folder. So the terminal here, that command prompt that I just did over here, I can do it inside Visual Studio Code, which is pretty cool, okay? So I'm in an empty folder here, and I'm going to say .NET New. Say .NET New. And these are all the things that you can make with a .NET application. I can make new tests and new Razor pages, which we'll talk about maybe in another video. And I can make React things and all kinds of stuff. I'm just going to say .NET New Console. .NET New Console. Console is what we're in right now, this kind of terminal thing here. So just to be clear, I said terminal, new terminal. I say .NET New Console. We'll hit enter. And I'm going to type dir for directory, and I can see suddenly what's going on here. Now I can click over here on the left in Visual Studio, and I can open that folder, and we can look at that code. So Visual Studio Code now is going to open that up. You also see that there's an open folder right here. Okay. So this is different than what we've been doing before, because now we've got our program.cs in a file. We're not in a notebook anymore. We're actually looking at code the way people usually do it. You might get a notification here that says, hey, do you want to build this? Are we doing this? You can say yes. You can totally say yes. And that's going to let us be able to run this application. So we went terminal, new terminal, and we're here now. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I know that was probably a lot for our audience to take in at one time, and it's like magic that just happened. So maybe if we can make sure everyone's kind of caught up and on the same page.
So here's the deal. Great point. Thank you for the check, Sharita. So let's go back here, and we made a Scott and Sharita folder. Here is our Explorer. If you're on a Mac, you'll be using the Finder. I made a folder on my desktop. I named it whatever made me happy. And I needed to create a bunch of files. I could make them all myself, but the .NET program, the .NET command line, can make them for me. So I can make these files a couple of different ways. If I go out to my terminal, new terminal, and I type .NET, it'll pop up and it'll say, hey, I can do that. You know, I can do stuff. There's like help. So I can say .NET -H, and that will display help. You want to know what version you have, you can say .NET -- version. Okay. There's version 5. We're in .NET 5. But what I did is I said .NET New that we saw before. And .NET New, I'm just going to make the terminal a little bigger here, shows you all the different, oops, let's make that a little bigger, all the different things I could make. These are templates. These are apps, basically. Look at this. I could make this Windows app. Here's, I can make a Windows Forms app. We can do one of those real quick before we're done. This can be confusing. This is where things go crazy, because it's like, look, like you did React. So you might make a ASP.NET app with React, and it would probably be very familiar and not familiar at the same time, because you'd see and get all the React parts, but then you'd not get all the ASP.NET parts.
Exactly, yeah.
Exactly. Some people might want to do it with Angular because they like that. I wanted to make the first one because it's the simplest possible thing, and because Terry in the chat says, let's do some user input. We're going to need to speed up because I want to make sure we get all of this done. But when I did that, it created all these files. It created some folders, and the C# file, you can see the little icon there for us. Terry Andre makes a great point. If you want to use Visual Studio instead, I appreciate that. There's a GUI, right, a graphical user interface. So Visual Studio 2019, I can go and say create new project. This is a different Visual Studio. And I could go and pick console application. This is a great point that Terry's bringing up, because it's the same thing. It's stick shift versus automatic. So here's the Terry console, okay? And we'll set next. It's .NET 5, hit create. It's going to chew, you know, if you can imagine your hard drive doing some stuff here, making some noise. And then it's going to bring up a very suspiciously similar looking program. Same kind of stuff. See over here? We got a bunch of files. So I chose to do it in Visual Studio Code, driving stick shift. I wanted to see how it was done. Nothing wrong with that. Terry makes the great point that I just want the thing. I don't care where it goes, whatever. We'll worry about that later. Let's get me going quicker. He wants to drive automatic. This is the difference between the code editor, that is Visual Studio Code, and the integrated development environment, the IDE. It's got more bells and whistles, right? That's a great point. But when you say make a new thing here in Visual Studio, it's just doing the same thing. It's just hiding it from us.
Yep.
Which I think is cool. Good point. Thank you for reminding me not to go too fast, Rita. So I'm going to open that up, programs.cs. Remember at the very beginning of day one, I was like, ignore all that. And we were like, yeah, they're going to make us ignore all that. We've been in notebooks. We've been chilling doing this. Here's a bunch of stuff that we have to think about. And we don't have too much time because we can show folks the advanced classes and places that they can learn these things. But all this time, you and I have been saying system.console.writeline, and we didn't know it. Right? The reason that we didn't have to keep saying system over and over and over again is because we said we're using system. We're using system. We can use all kinds of system. We can use all kind of stuff, right? So that's a shorthand that means I don't have to say system all the time. Okay, that's what that's for. System is a namespace. It's a space to make room for names, and the name that Microsoft picked was system. We can make our own namespace. So this thing that we're doing here, this class that we named program, we can call it whatever we want, my program. This is actually Scott and Sharita dot my program. Remember all those dots that we were doing? This dot this dot this. And this is the dot main function. My namespace, my program, and my function. So if someone were to use Scott and Sharita, they'd say using Scott and Sharita, and they'd use our thing. So that's the relationship between this and this. Right? So we named it, doesn't matter. This part here is the one magic thing that you just have to accept. It's an entry point. I don't actually know how this works in TypeScript. I don't think really anybody knows, right? Somewhere it's buried. When you run a TypeScript program, you said you do React? And
Yes. Yep.
You run TSC, or what do you run to?
TSX.
TSX. Okay. So that has to go and jump into your TypeScript program and find an entry point. It's got to start. Where's the front door? I mean, do you have to name it main, or does it just run anything? It's magic.
I don't know. It's getting deep in there.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't worry about it. So here, a C# program has to have a method called main. That's because it is. It's the entry point. A house has a front door. The way that we know our front door is here. It's called main. And it can take an array. We can pass in input. Doesn't have to. We can get rid of that if we want to. It doesn't return anything. It doesn't return a Boolean. It just returns nothing. And the void is nothing. The world, the space is a void, and it's filled with nothing. So if you're returning nothing, you return void. You could return an integer, like a yes or a no or whatever, but we're going to return nothing. And then static is going to be a little bit outside the scope of what we're doing here, but static means, unmoving, unchanging. Static technically means I don't need to make a new my program in order to call this. It's just there all the time without anyone having to make one. So we have a namespace, we named our own, we named our program, our class, and then we made a front door. And all of that was hidden from us. Back over in Notebook land. Here now, I can click on the little play button with the bug to run or debug my application. So if we hit the play button, and there's a thing up here that says .NET Core Launch, we're going to launch this. We're going to hit play. It's going to go and run the app. I'm going to do a bunch of scary things here. And let's see where it said hello. There it is. See all this stuff? I think React, TypeScript, this is just programming. They tell you a bunch of stuff. Here's the actual program output. So we said hello world. So if we say hello friends, hit play again. Chew, 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 think, think, think. Hello friends. Aaron's asking if static is like a Lambda function in Python. That's a pretty advanced question. You can make a Lambda, you can make a function, you can make an anonymous function, and you can pass functions around. We've been passing variables around. You can make Lambdas and pass them around. Static is saying, I don't need to make a new my program in order to call main. I can just call main directly. It's, I'm trying to think about the Python equivalent. In a strongly typed language, it's a little more complicated. But chat me on Twitter, and I'll get you an example of this in Python. Cool. So here we said hello, friends. And each time I hit play, it compiles it, turns it into a program, and then spits it out. Now, Inbar is asking what the difference is between console.writeline and display. That's a great question. This is a great question. So display that we saw before was a helper function. So there was a display method that we couldn't see that took a string and it called console.writeline for us. And all it did was it did that so we wouldn't have to do that, right? Then it was going to go and say display to just try to make things easier. Oops.
Mhm.
See if this is going to get mad here. And I see it's going to give me an error here, right? Not all code paths return.
Mm.
Actually, this doesn't need to return a, oops, there we go. So I made a function called display. So now my application does the same thing. It still says hello friends. Instead of me saying console.writeLine, I said display. This function here, this helper function, look at this. Look at this here. You see how there's like a little arrow here?
Yes.
I do this psychologically in big, long applications when they stress me out. Because it's like, I can't deal with whatever's going on here.
Yeah,
So
I recently started using that more.
really? It's nice.
Mhm.
It's like, I can't right now. So this is the I can't even button, right? Now, Jay Brennan is saying, can you hide all of that to the output is more visible? That is part of how Visual Studio Code is doing things. And I could get into the details of how it launches. If you go into here, there's a thing called launch.json that describes how it's going to go and launch this. And I believe there's a way to go and say, tell me less. Tell me less. The way that I do it when I'm doing this kind of work is I go out to the terminal myself. See, I go out to the terminal myself and I type .NET run. .NET run. Remember how we said .NET new to make one of these? I just said .NET run in there. I don't have to output anything. So to Jay's point, you can do that. So I can just leave the terminal down here. We can just keep doing that. So now our original question, Terry was saying, how do we get input? We've been saying console.writeLine. I bet you we can read line. Okay. String user input equals console.readLine. Display user input. That looks pretty clean.
Yep.
Yep, like that. Yep. Let's see if that works, right? So now I'm going to say .NET run again. I'm down here at in the terminal. I'm going to say .NET run. Oops. So this is a good one. What do we think we forgot to do, my friends?
Save.
Yep. Thank you. Sharita got it. This little dot right here is saying you got to save. It's a dirty flag. It says this is dirty. I need to hit save. So I'm going to go File, Save, or I'll just press Control S. So yeah, you could hit Auto Save, and it would just save automatically if you want to. So I'll just have to hit Save. Good catch. .NET Run. What's happening? It's just waiting.
It's thinking.
It's thinking. It's waiting for me to type anything. Because
why is it the last black? Oh, I wait for the little cursor to flash.
Yeah, you would wait for the cursor to flash, but I actually changed my cursor to not flash.
Oh, okay.
Right? But this is a great example where, let me go ahead and stop this. I probably should say something like, what's your name?
Yeah.
Right? Then do the read line and then keep going. Okay?
Yeah.
So I'll hit save. Yes. What's your name?
Nice.
And Sharita. Enter.
Hello.
Look at that. Now we're cooking with gas. Cool. So at this point, if I wanted to, I'm going to try a little thing here because I think Terry made the point about Visual Studio 2019 of having a GUI. So I'm going to take all of this code. I'm going to hit Control A. Control A is select all, and then Control C. So I'm literally just saying select all, and then I'm saying copy. So now it's in my clipboard. Okay. Switch back over to Visual Studio, the Terry console. I'm going to Control A, and I'm going to paste. So now we're over in another program, another app. We're using the IDE here. And now I can run my app like this. So let's hit that button, and it's going to start to build my app. Here it is. Enter, and then it's done. So it's a different way to do that debug experience. In this case, it popped up a window here. It popped up this window, and that window jumped out of here. Okay. Now one thing that you can do in both Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code that we haven't talked too much about, but we'll as we get towards the end here, we'll send people to some other videos, is you can do what's called a breakpoint. You can click over here in the what's called the gutter, this line along the side here. You can click in the gutter in the margins, and it makes a little red dot there. I can also, if I want, say breakpoint, I can insert a breakpoint. There's a hotkey for it. And a breakpoint means stop here. I don't know how often TypeScript people do this kind of stuff, interactive debugging. It's more of a C#.
Oh, no, we use it all the time.
Do you really?
And in the developer tools. Yeah.
Okay. So some people, I won't make any generalizations, different languages, they are more like outputting console.log, got here, got here. Other people do interactive debugging. It's a cultural decision, doesn't matter. But having interactive debugging is a really nice thing that you can do. So I'm going to say stop. We'll stop on line 11. We'll run this app. Hey, I'm debugging. Enter. The app stops. It freezes. And we are now stuck. See the little arrow? We're stuck on line 11. And just like we were hovering, just hovering the mouse over these variables, I can see I'm debugging. And check this out. See the little pin? Nobody ever clicks the little pin. It's a little Post-it note. And you can leave yourself notes. This should be the variable I use, or whatever. And you can keep these little notes around. And then if you open this up, sometimes those strings have like other data in it. And I might want to look at it like it's JavaScript, or I might want to look at it like HTML. So now I can see that variable change. So then I can continue on my way. I'm going to hit continue up here. All right, let's do that again. Hit play. What's your name? Reactor. Enter. See how it just turned red? It changed to reactor. And put the breakpoint here. We'll do it all over again. This is the thing that's great about debugging. You want to just do it and try it, do it and try it. So look at this. Right now, before I enter my name, it's null. It's nothing. Yeah. What's your name? Fred. Okay. So that experience, that debug, make a change, debug, make a change, you want to just find out what works for you.
Yeah.
So using Visual Studio, you can download that at visualstudio.com, visualstudio.com/free. And you can get the Mac version. You can get the Windows version. They're all free. Or you can get the Visual Studio Code, which runs on Linux or anything. I like to kind of bounce between them. If you go to .net.microsoft.com/learn-to-code, that's where you get the coding pack. That gives you Visual Studio Code and .NET, because they're two separate installs, and interactive notebooks, and the starter notebook. That's what we were doing. Last thing I want to show, because this is where I think things get really interesting. If you want to get into coding, you go to like File, New Project here in Visual Studio, and maybe we can go and make a Windows app. You can make Android apps. You can make Windows Forms app. You can do all kinds of stuff. We'll make a different kind of app. C# is great because it can do really any of these things. Windows Forms is a kind of an older style that people like to use. WPF is a thing. React, to your point, is a web technology that folks can
Yep.
use. That is pretty cool. So we're going to create this just really quick, a Hello World Windows app here as we get to the end. And it's making a form over here. Make this application pop up. Come on, computer. I think my computer is working pretty hard today, doing a lot, doing the most. Come on, computer, people are watching. There we go. Let's run this. I think it's going to pop up on one of my other monitors. So there you go. May not see that. Yep, here it is. And now it's over here. So now I have a form. And I could put a button and a chart and a graph and a whatever on it, right? That's cool. So that's using also C#. Last thing I could do, just to show you how many things that you can do with C#. Out at the command line again, instead of saying .NET new console, I can say .NET new web, or like to your point, .NET new React, and then .NET run. This is going to make not a console app, not a Windows app, but it's going to make a web app. And now it's listening on a web page. So I can go to my computer and I can say, hello world. And now I'm in my browser. So C# is letting me do all these things, which is super cool. And if you go and take a look at the .NET web page, you can make web apps, Android apps, iOS apps, desktop apps. You can make games. A lot of Xbox games are written in C#, which is super cool. But if you click on Learn, we've got this series. Not the series we're in right now, the .NET 101 video series. Check this out. We've got 19 parts on how to do C#. We've got our friends talking about doing more complicated things like APIs. Sweeky here, she talks about using a Raspberry Pi, like a little tiny computer in C#, which is cool. You want an introduction to Visual Studio? Kendra will go through that. We're always updating these things. Visual Studio for Mac, making games, lots and lots of resources available to folks. And you can also, if you want, do an in-browser tutorial. And then if you go to Microsoft Learn, you can go in here and you can see the different products. You can talk about what you're, what you do and what your job is. And one of the products is .NET. So here we can also learn C# in the browser, kind of like using notebooks, except we do it in the browser. So many ways to learn. Visual Studio Code, the education pack. Want to make sure that everybody has fun. So yeah, maybe we'll see you another time and you can show us how to do React, which in C#, which you're getting better at.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, cool.
Thank you all.
Thanks so much. Thank you everybody in the chat, and hang out with us and check out these links. Follow us all on Twitter as well.
And I dropped some messages in the chat for the Microsoft Reactor calendar, our YouTube. So if you missed any of the session or you want to revisit any information, do check out the Microsoft Reactor channel. Thank you all. Take care now. See you at the next one. Bye.